Honourable members, the prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our King, to his government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Amen. Please be seated. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to do... Honourable members, prior to moving to introductions, I'd like to draw your attention to the public gallery to my right. Adding a bright spot inside this chamber is the stained glass window unveiled 15 years ago in 2009. The window was gifted to the Assembly by the City of Edmonton in recognition of our 100th year of democracy here in the province of Alberta, inspired by a visit of one of the artists that made it to the legislature. The design is entitled Alberta, the land of opportunities. Its curves and lines within are a reference to the architecture of our building. The clerk.
Introduction of visitors.
Honourable members, it's my absolute honour and pleasure to introduce to all members of the Assembly a distinguished visitor joining us today in my gallery, Lord Hugo Swire. Served as a member of the United Kingdom House of Commons for East Devon in southwest England from 2001 to 2019. He served in various capacities in both the opposition and government, including the Minister of State for Northern Ireland, the Minister of State at Foreign and Commonwealth Office, where he was responsible for North and South America, Asia, Asia-Pacific, Australia, and the Commonwealth as an institution. Following his retirement from public office in 2019, Lord Swire was created Baron Squire of Down Street Mary in the county of Devon and was appointed to the House of Lords. Lord Swire joins us today in his role as the Deputy Chair of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Invest Council. The CWEIC is a non-profit organization with an official mandate from the Commonwealth Heads of Government to facilitate trade and investment through the 56 Commonwealth member nations. I was pleased to host him for lunch earlier today and thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and his insightful perspective. I'd please invite him to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Introduction of guests.
The honourable member for Edmonton Decore has a school group.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to introduce you and through you to the members of the Assembly, the students from Cardinal Ledger Junior High School from Edmonton Decore and their teacher Pascal Heitu. I ask the students and the educators to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Minister of Arts, Culture, and the Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Legislative Assembly a frequent visitor here and a faithful question period watcher, my mom, Josie Furr. She's been in question period withdrawal since May, so she's thrilled to be back. Mom, please rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
I wouldn't want to say she's my favorite MLA mom, but she might be. The honourable member for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce to you and through you a Christian organization based out of Edmonton called Parents and Kids Together, known as PACT. I ask them to please rise to receive the traditional warm welcome from the Assembly.
The Honourable Minister of Energy and Minerals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to introduce to you and through you representatives from Lindy, who recently announced a $2 billion investment in a hydrogen facility here in Alberta, and also members from Tourmaline, who last week opened up 2 new compressed gas fueling stations that will help to advance their network across Alberta in the next couple of years. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Beverly Clareview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
it's my honour to introduce to you and through you frontline healthcare workers from the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, representing more than 29,000 professionals across our healthcare system. These dedicated folks provide life-saving care every single day, and they are also advocating every single day for a stronger public healthcare system for all, and that is why 40 of them are here with us today, Mr. Speaker. I'd now ask them all to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome from this Assembly.
Are there others? The Honourable Member for Livingston McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce to you and through you Carrie Lynn McLeod. Carrie Lynn is an emerge nurse down in southern Alberta and more importantly my best friend. Carrie, I ask that you rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Are there others? Seeing none, the clerk.
Ministerial statements. Members' statements.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Beverly Clairview, has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our healthcare system is in crisis, but instead of addressing the basic challenges in the system like chronically understaffed facilities, lack of family docs, serious issues with recruitment and retention, this UCP government is making a bad situation worse. They're restructuring this system so they can hive it off to the lowest bidder, a dangerous path to walk, looking to the cheapest and most expeditious way rather than the best and most high-quality way. Let's be clear. Albertans and its healthcare workers, like those who met with our caucus today, like those who live in Edmonton, Beverly Clairview, want to see high-quality, accessible, publicly delivered healthcare, not experiments in privatization. And when it comes to addictions care, they know that this government's reckless one-size-fits-all approach will harm those Albertans who need care. Recovery, Mr. Speaker, does not look the same for everyone. Rather than this government's musings about de-skilling and privatization, we know that addictions care that is provided by qualified professionals and that respects an individual's autonomy is the only way to address the current crisis. This UCP government needs to get work on an immediate healthcare workforce plan, a plan where workers are valued, are paid fairly for their time, and where there's an understanding that their working conditions are patients' care conditions. No healthcare worker, Mr. Speaker, wants to see patients experience negative outcomes. They should be respected as the experts and professionals that they are, listened to and consulted, because they know what evidence-based healthcare should look like. They know how important it is that mental health and addictions care is delivered by trained professionals. And most of all, Mr. Speaker, they know that the very best healthcare for all of us here in Alberta is publicly funded and publicly delivered.
The Honourable Member for Grand Prairie is next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Protection for fundamental rights is necessary in a free and democratic society and is highly valued by Albertans. All Albertans expect their government to respect and protect their fundamental rights and freedoms. I've heard from my constituents in Grand Prairie that government needs to do a better job of protecting their rights and freedoms. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that other members of this House have been hearing the same thing from their constituents. I'm proud to say that our government has listened to these concerns and is acting now to amend the Alberta Bill of Rights. Since 1972, the Alberta Bill of Rights has been an important tool for holding the government to account, but has not been significantly updated since then. The amendments we are introducing in this House would make sure this law continues to serve Albertans in an evolving society. I would like to add that many of the proposed amendments in the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act relate to recommendations from the Public Health Emergencies Governance Review Panel. This expert panel reviewed the legislation and governance practices of government during the COVID-19 public health emergency. And many of the proposed amendments in the Bill of Rights relate to recommendations the panel made to improve protections for Albertans and better align the Alberta Bill of Rights with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Proposed changes would broaden and strengthen Albertans' rights with protections for personal autonomy, including the right to decide whether or not to receive a vaccination or other medical procedure, the right to acquire, keep and use firearms in accordance with the law, and strengthen property rights. If passed, the amended Bill of Rights will ensure that no Albertan can be deprived of their property without legal authorization and just compensation. Mr. Speaker, our government is fully committed to protecting the values and way of life that make Alberta such a great place to live. And I hope everyone in this chamber will support these important updates. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Honourable Member for St. Albert.
UCP government does not call waitlists waitlists. They call them in planning or waiting for service. They're one and the same when it comes to disability supports for children. Kids and families are waiting months, sometimes even a year for service. Family supports for children with disabilities legislation is clear. If the child meets the criteria for supports, they are eligible to receive those supports. Supports include occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, physiotherapy, behavioral supports, counseling, and respite. Right now, under this government, children and families that are finally getting that all-important diagnosis for their infants and children, often at a huge financial cost, are being told they've met criteria for funding, but they will have to wait until they are assigned a caseworker. And what that means, Mr. Speaker, is welcome to the wait list. Every month and year that an infant or child is denied or delayed service is a significant loss of potential and puts additional pressure on future supports. This government is failing to equip families with the help they need to raise a child with a disability because they cannot manage a wait list. To quote a 2023 CBC article, raising disabled kids is exhausting, but not why you think. UCP government has not updated their open data FSCD waitlists since December of 2021. Last we checked, over 4,000 families and children were waiting for services, losing time they will never get back. We hear from desperate families with disabled children and youth all across the province. Family and children are in crisis. Families have used up any and all private insurance or savings for early intervention and cannot afford more while lingering on a wait list. Families are collapsing under the pressure of unmet needs. Disabled children are losing ground and opportunity because this government chose not to properly fund disability supports, even after announcing millions more in additional funding to address exploding wait lists just before the last election. Funny how that happens. Alberta children deserve more than empty promises and an evolving disaster.
Yeah.
The Honourable Member for Lac St. Anne Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, this summer I engaged with constituents, fellow Canadians, and many folks from other countries. Affordability was a common and a pervasive theme. Post-pandemic economies everywhere saw different courses of action. Some jurisdictions required stimulus packages, some diversified, some mitigated the economic impacts by not overreacting. There was not a one-size-fit-all, and no one got it perfect. There was, however, one common amazing understanding. No country other than Canada thought increasing taxes on private citizens to change the weather was smart before, during, or after a pandemic. When I explained the level of wackonomics unleashed on the Canadians by the Liberal NDP coalliance, people were absolutely shocked. How the heck does taxing people for heating their homes, going to work, working the farm, do a darn thing to change the weather? Short answer, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't. It just makes it more difficult for people to live. If a private citizen came up with this glorified Ponzi scheme, we'd throw him in jail and throw away the key for good measure. But when a socialist government makes it law, it's supposed to be good for our own good. The members opposite have the audacity to point their fingers, politicizing economic struggles of Albertans caused from something they brought in when they governed. They brought in this tax scam simply to punish us. Their Liberal NDP alliance doesn't and won't offer Albertans any relief, and the Alberta chapter of the NDP still supports this thing. Now, the same group that claims to control the climate through taxation couldn't lift a finger to prevent wildfires that burnt 30% of Jasper down this summer. They're well-versed in pontification, but not much for practical action. Zero effort to remove the dead trees that are a massive fuel load surrounding that village. A jewel in all of our eyes, Mr. Speaker. The former MP warned them as early as 2017, pleading for action, and that fell on deaf ears. The phantom of the opposition, the new and improved liberalized NDP leader, maybe he should pick up his phone and call his bestie down in Ottawa and get him to axe the tax. I won't hold my breath, but neither should Albertans. Our government, however, is working hard and provincial leaders to continue to stand up for everyday Canadians and Albertans, who all know you can't change the weather by robbing people blind.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton South has a statement to make.
Mr. Speaker, as we begin the fall session, I'm reminded that my voice represents thousands in Edmonton South. Neighbours, friends, and family who put their trust in me to speak on the issues that matter to them and hold this government accountable when their best interests aren't being served. So I'd be remiss to not speak on the topic that I'm continually flooded with emails and phone calls about: the South Edmonton Hospital. Our healthcare system is truly in disrepair. We have doctors and nurses leaving the province because they're sick and tired of working under a government that doesn't listen to them, doesn't doesn't collaborate with them, and doesn't value their expert knowledge. How can this be the case when the Minister of Health speaks on platitudes of lemonade stands and pits North against South in Edmonton? Or when the Premier says that constituents in my riding could drive to Red Deer 90 minutes one way to get the care they need. In 2017, I was proud to join the former NDP government to announce the intention to build the South Edmonton Hospital, because I knew, as a resident in Edmonton South, as a mother, as a caregiver to an elderly parent, how vital it would be to have a hospital access close to home. Back then, our hospitals were overcrowded. Back then, our frontline healthcare workers said we needed a hospital. And back then, a plan and business case was set to see that hospital built by 2026. So now, where are we? No construction has started. No timeline has been given. And this UCP government fights tooth and nail when millions of taxpayer dollars have already been spent to get construction underway. $69 million to be exact, Mr. Speaker. I want the people of Edmonton South to know that I will continue to speak on the need for a hospital until the day it finally opens. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary, Bular McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Premier's friend Jordan Peterson from Ontario lost in court, she took action. It's not the first time she has raised concern with the court decisions and the independence of judiciary. Instead of focusing on the priorities of Alberta, the Premier wants to review all self-regulating professions to make room for kind of wild things our friend Jordan Peterson said. Let's be clear that Jordan Peterson admittedly encouraged people to commit suicide and made hateful remarks about a number of minority groups of Canadians as a registered psychologist. She also indicated she wants to ensure that regulatory bodies are not imposing unnecessary training on professionals. Does she think the Law Society of Alberta's path course about reconciliation constitutes an overreach and unnecessary training? Mr. Speaker, our professionals, including medical doctors, lawyers, psychologists, and others, have a professional code of conduct to adhere to. I must ask, does Premier think that it was acceptable for her former Deputy Premier Casey Meadow to call the police chief over a traffic ticket? Or perhaps does she think it's acceptable that former Minister of Health Tyler Shandro to scream at doctors' door because this government has neglected health care? These are the failures that our professional regulatory bodies are rightly able to self-govern. And, Mr. Speaker, it should not be the purview of the Premier to intrude on this work. Had the Premier read the decision, she would see that the court agreed that the College of Psychologists of Ontario decision, and I quote, proportionately balanced the competing interests, protecting the public interest in professionalism and communication by members and prevention of harm while minimally impairing Dr. Peterson's right to freedom of expression. Mr. Speaker, Premier must stay in her lane and stop this witch hunt of our professional colleges and let them do their job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Presenting petitions, notices of motions, introduction of bills.
Let's do tables.
Tabling returns and reports.
The honourable member for Edmonton Whitemud has a tabling, followed by Edmonton McClung.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to table the requisite number of copies of an article titled "Nowhere to Turn: Alberta's Dismissal History of Support for Youth and Dismal History, of Support for Youth in Transition to Adulthood" by Sarah N. Kreikel. I referred to this article in my debate yesterday on Motion 514. Thank you so much.
Member for Edmonton McClung.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to table the requisite 5 copies of an article written by Ricky Leong entitled "No Saving Face Over the Green Line Fiasco," which really details, Mr. Speaker, the timeline through which the provincial government has meddled in this fiasco and really caused a huge amount of money to be lost by the province and taxpayers.
Cypress Medicine Hat has a tabling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to submit the 5 requisite copies of a great article showcasing the great work of our sheriffs with the Fugitive Apprehension Sheriff Support Team.
The honourable member for Calgary Bennington, and we will return after question period.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to table the requisite number of copies of an article entitled 3 Decades of Research, the Case for Comprehensive Sex Education. It's got a really great piece in here about prevention of childhood sexual abuse with comprehensive sexual health curriculums.
Honourable members, the time is now 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the Leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition has question 1.
Mr. Speaker, while the Premier focuses on placating her base ahead of the leadership vote, Albertans, even those with 2 incomes, are finding it increasingly hard to put food on the table. In a new report, the Calgary Food Bank says usage has shot up 90% since the UCP took office, 6% in the last year alone. The CEO says this is a bigger increase than the rest of the country has seen. Why is food bank usage skyrocketing under this UCP government more than anywhere else in Canada?
The Honourable the Premier has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Leader of the Official Opposition for the question. We are a government who is the first to support food banks. We came through with a $10 million support last year, $5 million administered through family and community social supports, as well as $5 million that was matching grants. We continue with that program this year because we do recognize an essential need that we have in our communities. As we go through the budget process, no doubt we'll also be looking at the statistics and seeing if we need to extend that plan.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that additional funding didn't even help operations for a single day. The CEO of the food bank gave this incredibly alarming statistic. 37% of Alberta Food Bank clients are working, and that's higher than the national average. So while the government thinks the only people who are struggling, all they need to do is get a job, the hard reality is food bank clients are working, but costs are skyrocketing while the Premier does nothing. So again, why is food bank usage skyrocketing under this UCP government more than anywhere else in Canada?
The Honourable the Premier is risen.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Official Opposition should know that part of the reason why we are disadvantaged by the federal government's carbon tax is the cost of everything is underscored by fossil fuels, whether it is the truck that takes the groceries to a grocery store, whether it is the truck that takes the food off the field, whether it is the equipment being used to create the food in the first place. And I wish that the Leader of the Official Opposition would join us in calling our boss in Ottawa and saying that we should end the retail carbon tax. That's the way you bring prices down, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we're seeing more use in Alberta than anywhere else, and yet she references a national program. I don't think she understands what's happening here in Calgary. The CEO of Calgary Food Bank has this to say about Alberta. Quote, folks are coming for opportunity, and then they get here and they're struggling to find jobs. They're struggling to find housing, end quote. The CEO says they're lined up out the door looking for help, and the Premier should know all this because she stopped by for a visit to complain about plastic bags. Instead, picking more useless fights doesn't help. Why isn't this Premier listening to Albertans?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, 100% of our heating of those buildings comes from natural gas, which has a carbon tax on it that is 3 times the cost of the natural gas. Mr. Speaker, we have 90% of our power grid that is fueled by natural gas, which also has a carbon tax, which is 3 times the amount of the natural gas. We have gasoline and diesel that is used to transport products, which has a 35-cent federal tax on it from all the different ways that they're taking a hit. That, Mr. Speaker, is the reason why Alberta is specifically disadvantaged and why they should join us in our carbon tax lawsuit.
Order. The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition for her second set of questions.
Mr. Speaker, this government funds education at the lowest per-student funding level in Canada and now has made everything worse with Bill 20. School boards now have to pay for the Premier's conspiracy theories because she's against vote tabulators to count ballots. In Edmonton, counting trustee ballots by hand is going to cost $1.9 million, money that could have been spent to hire more or pay more to our educational assistants. Why is the Premier wasting money on vote counting conspiracies to satisfy her base instead of hiring more EAs?
The Honourable the Premier.
leader of the official opposition continue to align herself with her bosses in Ottawa. We have a federal carbon tax that is going to cost our education system $61.9 million by 2030. That is the equivalent of hiring 495 teachers. At that time, schools will have spent a cumulative total of $391 million on the punitive carbon tax, and oh, by the way, they don't get a rebate. One more time, let's get the official leader of the opposition to stand up and stand with us.
The order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I and the members of the official opposition are here to stand up for Albertans, and Albertans want their kids to get good education. It's not just Edmonton school boards that will have to divert millions to pay for the Premier's baseless conspiracy theories. In Airdrie, the city estimates that banning vote tabulators will cost residents $160,000 for hand counting of ballots. Clearly, there are better uses for these funds. They could hire educational assistants so that a child who is a Ukrainian refugee can get the English language supports that they need. Why are you believing conspiracies?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the amount of carbon tax that the City of Calgary alone spent in 2023 would have been enough to hire 121 police officers or firefighters. Now take that across the entire province, and the cost associated with the federal carbon tax, which they continue to support, is not good for school boards, it's not good for health facilities, it's not good for municipalities. Please, Mr. Speaker, I'm begging you, ask them to stand up and take a stand with us that opposes the federal carbon tax.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, governing by conspiracy theory is not good for Alberta. Thousands of working people turned up last week at this legislature demanding better pay for staff like our incredible educational assistants. They deserve a raise, and our kids need more of them in the classroom. But the Premier tells EAs no, so that she can say yes to conspiracy theories about vote tabulators. Even the BC Conservatives have admitted their election was safe, it was secure when using tabulator machines. Why waste millions of dollars for conspiracy theories?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's take a trip down memory lane. Because in 2017, when the NDP were in power, they had a mandate for 0% increases for frontline staff. They did the same thing in 2018, and oh, guess what? Same thing in 2019. Wow. So they are standing here today, having given 0 increases to education assistants in 2017, 0% increases in 2018, wow. 0% increases in 2019. Mr. Speaker, we value our frontline workers. We're looking forward to the bargaining process, completing and getting a negotiated settlement at the table.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition for a third set of questions.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier said last week that she's done with asylum seekers coming to Alberta. These are people fleeing war. These are people who need our Canadian and Albertan generosity to find a safe and peaceful place to live. My question to the Premier is, which asylum seekers from which countries will this Premier not welcome to Alberta?
Yeah. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were very grateful to the members of our community who helped to bring asylum to 63,000 Ukrainians who were fleeing the war in Ukraine. We have done an incredible amount to be able to support that group, and as a result, when the federal government has asked for an additional 28,000 people to be flown to Alberta without supports, we had to say, we need the money, we don't have the space, we need to make sure that we're connecting people with jobs so that they can support themselves.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this Premier welcomed thousands of people to this province with her own multi-million-dollar ad campaign. She set aspirational targets for provincial growth, like growing Red Deer to 1 million people. Any day now, Alberta's population will reach 5 million, but there aren't enough hospitals, schools, jobs, or homes for everyone. The Premier can't get more inconsistent with what she says. It feels like she's playing politics, not planning. And I'd really like to ask, which is it? Grow Red Deer to 1 million people or close the borders?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have always been very consistent that we welcome anyone to Alberta who has a job, who wants to be able to build a business, raise their family, and build a life here. And that is part of the reason why we reached out to our friends across the country. I think we were just as surprised as anyone that 200,000 people chose to come to Alberta in 2023. And then we discovered that Justin Trudeau's reckless policies had brought in almost 2 million people in 2023. This is why we have asked for a return for more rational policies on immigration, international students, temporary foreign workers, and asylum seekers.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier talks about welcoming people but not asylum seekers escaping war and violence. And it's not too late for the province to work with other levels of government to find solutions. But what Albertans need is a Premier who's focused on building up public services, not tearing them down or cancelling them, like cancelling the South Edmonton Hospital, Mr. Speaker. So what exactly is the Premier doing, besides picking unnecessary fights, using bombastic language, to fix the mess, to fund public services, and to work with all levels of government to encourage growth for a better province?
The Honourable the Premier has the call.
Mr. Speaker, talk about talking on both sides of your mouth. That's what we're hearing from the Leader of the Official Opposition. We have an increase in housing prices. As a result, Build and their associated companies have massively increased the amount of year-over-year construction for single-family homes and rental units. We have also seen that if you go to some communities, they've had to winterize their campgrounds because they don't have enough spaces for people to live in homes. They have also seen an increase in the number of shelter spaces. Mr. Speaker, we are a generous place. We want to welcome people here, but coming to a shelter or campground is not an appropriate way to support newcomers.
A point of order is noted at 2:02. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Beddington has a question.
Alberta currently has a well-functioning sexual health curriculum opt-out system for the minority of families who wish to do so. Now, this government wants to flip the switch and have the vast majority of parents take on the burden of yet another school form. You know those forms that you fish out of the bottom of the backpack weeks after they were sent home? And for families for whom English is a second language, the burden of administrative forms is significant. To the Minister, the system Alberta got ain't broke. So what exactly is the UCP trying to fix?
The Minister of Education has risen.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we want to make sure that parents are strong partners in their kids' education. We know that parents have the best interests of their child at heart, and we know that when parents are working closely with teachers and other educational staff, we get the best possible results. So we want to work to ensure that we're able to build the strongest possible connection and cooperation between parents and between teachers and other staff. Mr. Speaker, we'll be, of course, working more with our school divisions and other partners as we move forward on implementing new policies, but to help ensure that we have the best possible outcome for kids.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Beddington.
Evidence supports that children who receive good quality, age-appropriate sexual health education results in lower teen pregnancy rates, lower sexually transmitted infection rates, and delayed timing for first sexual encounters. When it comes to sexual health, changing to an opt-in model sends a message that sexual health information is taboo. Why does this government want to politicize good quality sexual health information, and who exactly was asking for this change?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, we're not doing anything like that at all. We're not politicizing sex education at all. The member has it wrong, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, we want to ensure and make sure that parents are integral partners in the education of their children. I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. I want to hear from the NDP. If they don't believe that parents are partners in education, if they don't believe in the responsibility of parents and families in the education of their children, I invite the members opposite to let their position be well known. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to make sure that parents and families and communities are all integrally connected.
The Honourable Member.
Puberty prepares people to function as adults with healthy bodies, choices, thoughts, emotions, and relationships. Positive health practices during puberty include engaging in physical activity, eating nutritious foods, and reducing stress. These are learning outcomes directly from the Grade 3 and Grade 5 sexual health curriculum. So can the minister explain why he wants to add barriers between children and this important education?
The Honourable Minister.
We're not adding barriers, and happy to hear the member quote directly from our curriculum, which is developed and strong, as the member has noted, is a strong curriculum that gives students the foundations that they need to be successful, both in their academics and in their personal lives and in personal relationships as well. Of course, at the end of the day, it's always been the practice to give parents the final decision over their students' or their child's participation in sexual education. That's always been the case in the province. Parents have that right currently, and they will continue to have that right. And I'm happy to see that the member opposite thinks our curriculum is strong and robust.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Glenmore has a question.
The summer season is over, but the UCP's mismanagement of the electricity sector since 2019 does not seem to end. Albertans now experience grid alerts every season. The latest was last week in -3 degrees. The minister shockingly asked yesterday who's going to use all that electricity. Maybe to stop grid alerts, to export and make money, bring the data centers the Premier is courting. After 5 years, why does this Premier continue to mismanage the sector, unable to keep the lights on?
The Honourable Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, the opposition demonstrates their lack of understanding of our electricity grid. This is what's typically called the shoulder season, when it's not -40 or +40. This is why all our thermal dispatchers do regular scheduled maintenance at this time. Now, when we get a little bit close to the limit, because the wind didn't show up or the sun didn't shine, we are issued an alert by our ISO. This is standard practice. We never got close to any rolling brownouts. We never got close to any lack of supply. This is why we do it now, so we have electricity all through the winter.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Glenmore.
Given the UCP mismanagement in electricity and market uncertainty is now driving investments away, given that industry players are saying loud and clear they are investing outside of our province, and given that Ontario, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and BC will absorb investments, rural economic development, and low-cost power that Alberta is missing out on, why is the UCP targeting renewables, scaring away investments in the electricity sector?
The Honourable Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Again, the opposition has it incorrect. Alberta actually leads Canada in renewable development. We have more wind than any other province. We have more solar than any other province. It is a larger portion of our grid than any other province can claim. 31.5% of our capacity comes from wind or solar. Investment is here because we are an open market. Every other province has to issue an invitation for them to build, whether it's Ottawa or Ontario or Manitoba or BC, begging for them to come and build measly 5,000 or 10,000 megawatts. We've already surpassed that, and we continue to grow.
The Honourable Member.
Given that Albertans continue to face grid alerts, and the Environment Minister told us, quote, think of a mom awake with her baby in the middle of the night and she can't turn on the lights. And given this minister never stopped campaigning for the UCP leadership instead of focusing on her file, given the Premier told us safety and lives are at risk due to blackouts, why is the UCP fear-mongering for personal gain and mismanaging the sector instead of attracting investment and ensuring Albertans keep the lights on?
The Honourable Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Mr. Speaker, our leaders and our Premier have been advocating to keep natural gas dispatchable generation available. That's what the federal government is trying to stop. That's what the federal government is trying to turn off. That's what the federal government is going to risk for blackouts and increasing the cost of affordability of electricity to all Albertans. That's why we stand up for Albertans. That's why we are building a reliable, dependable grid with affordability at the forefront of everything that we do to make sure that the investment that comes to Alberta serves Albertans.
The Honourable Member for Vermilion, Lloydminster Wainwright.
Mr. Speaker, earlier today, the Premier and the Minister of Justice announced that Alberta will be challenging the exemption of home heating oil from the carbon tax in court. Every MLA in this chamber has constituents who are facing punishing increases to their home heating from Nenchi's Liberal NDP bosses in Ottawa, and we've challenged the carbon tax before. Can the Minister of Environment tell the House whether the carbon tax actually even does what it's supposed to and reduce emissions?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for this question. Absolutely not, Mr. Speaker. The federal carbon tax did not reduce emissions, Mr. Speaker, but it did raise the cost of everything. The federal government's own numbers continue to show that Canadians suffer a net cost, paying more in the carbon tax than they will ever get back in rebates. Wow. Mr. Speaker, we know the impacts of carbon taxes here in Alberta. The sad thing is it wasn't even Justin Trudeau or Jagmeet Singh who had to bring it in, because the Alberta NDP did it for them, Mr. Speaker. Oh, yeah. The opposition needs to do the right thing, stand with our government, and demand that Ottawa axe the tax.
The Honourable Member for Vermilion, Lloydminster Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the response. Given that our government has long opposed the carbon tax, in fact, the first bill the United Conservative government passed in 2019 was the repeal of the largest tax increase put on Albertans, the NDP carbon tax. And given that their federal bosses then imposed one on us anyway, can the Minister of Energy and Minerals tell the House if home heating oil gets an exemption, should natural gas get one as well?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy and Minerals.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans are frustrated when they see the carbon tax on their heating bill is more and higher than the actual cost of the gas they've consumed. Albertans are also shocked to know that Atlantic Canadians are using a more carbon-intensive and more polluting fuel, and at the same time don't pay any carbon tax on their heating. That's simply not fair, Mr. Speaker. Trudeau and Guilbeault are out of touch. The NDP backed this carbon tax. We should axe the tax as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker. Tax fairness, equity across all provinces across the entire country, that's what we need. And the NDP should be ashamed of themselves for backing the carbon tax.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the response. Given that the federal government exempted home heating oil from the carbon tax, stating that it was due to, quote, given the pressures faced by households and small businesses, and given the NDP's bosses in Ottawa are putting pressure on every household and small business across the country, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Affordability and Utilities tell the House how axing the tax would help families and businesses in Alberta?
The Honourable the Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for such a great question. Axing the tax would save every small business and family in Alberta hundreds of dollars each year. More than 80% of Alberta households would save nearly $500 a year on home heating alone. The carbon tax increases inflation, input costs for businesses, making everything from buying groceries to filling up your gas tank more expensive. Axing the tax is the best way to put more money back into the pockets of Alberta's families and small businesses.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Varsity has a question to ask.
Earlier today, I met with several members of the Health Sciences Association of Alberta. They have clear asks of us, including, quote, trained professionals should be providing mental health and addictions care. Given that it is not compassionate to download the important work onto untrained community members, and that a 5-day orientation is not training as an addictions counselor, why is the government ignoring the importance of proper training for this work, and do they realize it is impacting morale and both client and worker safety?
The Honourable the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction has risen.
Mr. Speaker, I want to start by thanking all of Alberta's healthcare workers, especially those who are working in Recovery Alberta with mental health and addiction. We happily had close to all 15,000 members of HSAA come over to Recovery Alberta, with the exception of 15 who continued within AHS. And I know that they will continue to do great work. As negotiations are ongoing, the appropriate place for that conversation is at the bargaining table. But I can say right now the Alberta recovery model is working. If we look over year from April all the way to June, July, we see a 40 and 50% decrease in opioid deaths. We are going to continue down this path, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member of Calgary Varsity.
Given that their members have travelled from as far south as Lethbridge and as far north as Lacrete. And given that they work in addictions and mental health, recreation, radiation, X-ray, public health, EMS, and home care. And given that they came here expecting to meet the Minister of Health, but their meeting was cancelled at the last minute, and a meeting with this minister was not even set up, to the minister, you are missing a chance to hear from frontline workers. Will you agree to prioritize and meet them today?
The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Addiction.
Mr. Speaker, it was 2,500 workers, pardon me, to correct the last answer. And I'll also say that the appropriate place for a conversation with board members and president and others from the union is at the bargaining table, and I don't want to disrespect the bargaining process by trying to have that conversation on the floor of the legislature. That being said, the members from Lacrete and others, Trina, nice to see you. Very glad to have you here, and I'm very happy to work with HSA members and members across every union when it comes to building the Alberta recovery model. Happily, Mr. Speaker, we're seeing increasingly positive numbers when it comes to our outcomes. We are going to continue with this work, and we know our frontline workers are a part of that solution.
The Honourable Member.
Given that the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions declined this meeting with essential healthcare workers, and given again that they travelled across the province to meet with this minister to share their experience and discuss additional solutions that could be included, including a need for a broader scope of addiction care, will the minister please reconsider, show some respect for these healthcare workers who traveled purposely to meet with him and actually meet them today?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned before, the appropriate place for conversation with board members from a union surrounding negotiations is at the bargaining table. That is a process I do not want to disrespect or circumvent. That being said, if somebody wants to offer solutions when it comes to addiction and mental health, I'm all ears. If your solution means recovery, if it means helping those with health care to heal, but if members opposite want to talk about solutions like we saw my critic mention earlier this week when it came to unsafe supply, the answer is no categorically. This province will not further endanger those in addiction and our communities with more drug in the streets.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, this summer Albertans and Canadians alike watched in shock as Jasper, the jewel of the Rockies, suffered devastation from an out-of-control wildfire. This fire did unspeakable damage to the community and to the economy of Jasper, with many of the hotels and small businesses suffering catastrophic damage. These businesses lost more than half of their busiest season and will likely not see business return for years to come. Why is this government standing by and not providing relief to these businesses?
The Honourable the Minister of Municipal Affairs has risen.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have a group of ministers, led by the Premier, in pretty much constant contact with Jasper, her citizens, her businesses, providing all the support, all the relief we can. If the honourable member has ideas for what more we could do, I'd be happy to hear it. But I can tell you, as just about an hour ago, before question period, I spent some time dealing with the people that are scheduled to take out the foundations of the burnt down homes so that we can get at full-fledged construction next spring. Mr. Speaker, the work goes on. It hasn't really stopped on this side of the House, and the honourable member actually can contribute positively to it. I'm all ears.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Foothills.
Well, we should chat because we have been talking to businesses and the administration in Jasper about those ideas. Given that the economy of Jasper is almost entirely dependent on tourism, and the town is faced with the additional blow of CN announcing they'll move their operations yard, given that these businesses are labor-intensive businesses employing hundreds of workers, many now faced with both relocating and finding new work, why is this government not stepping forward with their relief plan to support these businesses? Their employees help them plan for the future, and their workers so that they can stay in Jasper.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'm actually in shock. I am genuinely in shock with the nature of that question. To suggest that this government has not stepped up in a whole government approach in collaboration with the federal government and with the municipal government of Jasper and Parks Canada to make sure the community of Jasper gets back on its feet as fast as possible. I'm almost at a loss for words, except it's my job to answer this question. The Minister of Tourism and Sport has committed $2.5 million to manage reputational damage to make sure the tourism continue to come back to Jasper from around Canada, around the world. The Minister of Community and Social Services has been there. The Minister of Municipal Affairs has been there. I have been there. Has that member been to Jasper?
No. The honourable member for Calgary Foothills.
I have been meeting with businesses from Jasper and with the CAO. And we've not heard an announcement to get the businesses back on their feet. And given that the town of Jasper is located within the jurisdiction of Parks Canada and Environment Canada for planning, that there is precedence for the province working with the federal government in other industries, including agriculture, to provide business relief after natural disasters. Why is this government not stepping forward, working with the town and with the federal government to provide relief for the businesses? Stop fighting the feds and help those businesses.
The Honourable the Minister of Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member has actually been to Jasper, he would know that this government and the federal government are stepping up to support Jasper. We're investing significant amounts of money to be able to make sure that the crown jewel of our community, of our province and the Rockies will be able to continue forward. Just the other day, I announced $125 million going to create interim housing to be able to make sure Jasper can continue to do their job going forward, Mr. Speaker. We were there the day after it was burnt down. The Premier was there. Ministers have been there consistently ever since. And the community of Jasper has said that they're very appreciative, Mr. Speaker. So let's stop playing politics with people's lives, Mr. Speaker, and not play NDP games.
The order. The honourable member for Airdrie East has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta is growing exponentially with record numbers from Canadians from across the country and ambitious newcomers choosing to call our province their home. They are choosing to work and raise their families in a dynamic province with a government that's committed to creating jobs, attracting investment, and delivering high-quality education. With a rapidly growing population, Alberta is boldly confronting new challenges and opportunities. To the Minister of Education, what actions has Alberta's government taken to build new schools to accommodate increased enrollment and ensure students can reach their full potential?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. A great question. And of course, the MLA knows some of the significant pressure that many municipalities are feeling with this influx of new people choosing to call Alberta home. To help accommodate this significant pressure in enrollment, we have announced the School Construction Accelerator program that aims to add 200,000 spaces over the next 7 years. In addition, we're also accelerating approval timelines and processes so that a school project can move from one stage to the next as fast as possible, and we aim to see those schools be built and those new spaces be full and occupied as soon as possible.
The Honourable Member for Airdrie East.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Minister. An $8.6 billion investment in new student spaces is tremendous news to every single MLA in this chamber and to families across this province. Given that the Minister of Education has committed to opening 200,000 new and modernized student spaces, and given the rapidly emerging opportunities in Alberta's diversified economy, and given the importance of ensuring students have the skills required to begin rewarding careers and succeed in the economy of tomorrow, how is the Minister ensuring that these new and modernized schools will support students in pursuing jobs and higher education?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Well, that's one of the exciting pieces of this new program, Mr. Speaker, is that as we look to build and design these new schools and modernize additional schools as well, we have the opportunity to make sure that the spaces in these schools are aligned with the needs of our workforce. We can look at adding, of course, CTS spaces, spaces for dual credit and other career exploration opportunities so that students can explore various career options and, of course, be ready to go whether to post-secondary or to the career after they graduate.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker. It's encouraging to know that students have so many academic and career pathways to help prepare for the future. Given that Alberta's government is committed to ensuring communities of all sizes have the resources needed to grow and to thrive, and given the importance of supporting the needs of our big cities and rural communities, how is the minister ensuring these schools are delivered in the communities where they are needed most?
The Honourable Minister.
And so as we look at the various projects that our school divisions have submitted to us, we will be taking a close look to explore utilization rates, to explore demand, to explore pressure and need. Of course, one of the key priorities of this program is to build schools in communities of greatest need. Those, of course, being communities that are experiencing the fastest growth and the most significant growth. So we will be evaluating the various submissions and, of course, looking at those variables to decide where those projects should move forward.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning has a question to ask.
Diagnostic Services Unit at the University of Calgary offers fee-for-service veterinary pathology and diagnostic services to the veterinary community and researchers. The missions of the Diagnostic Services Unit is to advance education, research, and scholarly programs at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. It was recently announced that the DSU received funding under SCAP and is extended to March 31st, 2025. To the Minister, given that this is a shared funding model between the federal and provincial governments, and given that March 21st is only 6 months away, can the Minister guarantee that there will be funding for the important animal health and human health services past March 2025?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for this question, because this gives a chance to really highlight the excellent work that UCVM does. Of course, our government understands how important veterinary medicine is to our province here in Alberta, being a province that actually has more cattle than we do people at over 5 million. So, of course, over the years, we've invested $67.4 million to create 50 new seats within the UCVM, so we're training more veterinarians so that we can deal with the shortage that we're seeing right now in the province of Alberta. And we have $3.44 million in a CAP partnership and funding to start new diagnostics pilot to build more.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And given that Alberta actually is provides the least amount of funding across the whole country for DSU services, and Alberta-supported services provide affordable, accurate, in-province livestock diagnostics, and given that these diagnostic services can prevent industrial infection and support human health, and given that bird flu has been transferred to workers from dairy cows in the United States, and given that without DSU in Alberta, samples will have to go to Saskatchewan. To the Minister, DSU plays a significant part in ensuring the health and welfare of animals and protects public health. For the benefit of the industry and Albertans, will the government fund a 5-year funding cycle, not one?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, thanks for the question, because I'll continue on the funding that this government has provided to this DSU. Funding that was non-existent when the NDP was in power. They didn't even see or put any importance in this area. We $3.44 million in the CAP partnership funding to start the veterinary diagnostics pilot to build access to more affordable and accessible diagnostic services. We're seeing the impact of that right now. We have an additional $2.26 million in sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership grant to continue to expand the pilot, and we talk about 560 in CAP funding to continue the work.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the Minister was so excited to have questions for me, you'd think he'd have the answers. So given the impact of Alberta-supported livestock diagnostics include more timely diagnostics for producers with a fee, and given in 2022 over 30,000 tests were sent from Alberta to Saskatchewan alone because we didn't have the capacity, and given that SCAP funding is federal funding and provincial funding, and with Bill 18 this is up in the air, will the government commit today they will not use Bill 18 to refuse the accepted funding to support animal welfare, human health, public health, and provide it for 5 years?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying here is you're seeing a list of massive funding that this government has put around the DSU and the work that UCVM is doing. The $568,000 in 2022 cap funding, we put the $1.2 million additional funding in 2023 for renovations. This shows this government understands how important the DSU is to our livestock industry here in the province. I continue to meet with UCVM and have conversations to make sure that the work they're doing, the excellent work they're doing, they're going to be able to continue in the future, and I can assure you that we will make sure that work continues.
Honourable members, a point of order was noted at 2:25 by the official opposition leader. The honourable member for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul has a question to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is focused on improving long-term care capacity in Alberta. It is an issue that my constituents and Albertans are all very interested in addressing. The recent conversations with my local private health care providers was they shared with me that Bonnyville, for instance, there is 80 available spaces and 19 slated for closure by 2027. However, the demand forecast shows the need for 95 beds by 2029 and 112 beds by 2034. To the Minister of Seniors, Community, Social Services, how will the government ensure my communities have the spaces they need?
The Honourable Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable member's right. Underneath the NDP healthcare system, we saw a disaster when it came to continuing care. Now thousands of seniors living in acute care beds rather than in appropriate spaces all across the province and being forced to leave, particularly rural communities, to have to go to urban areas to receive care. It's why the government's invested $654 million in capital over the next 3 years when it comes to continuing care, and over $1 billion for transformation when it comes to continuing care. What I want the honourable member to know, Mr. Speaker, is the government is going to continue to take this seriously. We're going to make sure everybody has a place to stay that is appropriate, and we're going to make sure rural Alberta is not forgotten like the official opposition always does.
The honourable member for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member or to the minister for the answer. Given that there is a current and a significant wait list for Bonnyville Health Care Centre long-term ward, and the residents have been looking for additional capacity for some time, and further given that significant funding was announced into the 2024 budget for continuing care, can the minister please share an update on funding for the increased capacity in my constituency?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, we're investing over $1 billion in transition and almost $654 million in more capital. That is available if anybody's looking for information on that on alberta.ca on the continuing care page for anybody who would like to see how that may impact their community going forward. We're also going to continue to work with both Alberta Health Services, but as well as our other providers across the province to be able to look for new innovative ways to be able to face the challenges that we're seeing with continuing care. And most important, we're going to take the capital side of seniors' lodges and the continuing care side of the healthcare system and bring them together like they were before the NDP broke it when they were in power in 2015, which is going to get more buildings built.
The honourable member for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the minister. Given that I have met with healthcare providers that are looking to partner with the government and invest in additional capacity, and further given that this concern is a priority for my constituents and this government, can the minister please share if there is any developments or discussions that are happening for additional long-term care spaces in the Lakeland region?
The honourable minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are having conversations all across the province, including the honourable member's constituency, to make sure that we have targeted investments to be able to make sure that we can keep care of people that need continuing care from north to south, from east to west, Mr. Speaker. And I want to stress again for the honourable member that rural Alberta will be taken seriously. I know that during the official opposition's time in government that it was not taken seriously. We have a tremendous amount of work to be able to fix the mistakes that were made during that time, where we saw wait lists go up by over 70% for this type of housing, Mr. Speaker. But we have a plan. We're going to work together with the industry, and we're going to make sure that we get it fixed.
The honourable member for Edmonton Decor has a question to ask.
Mr. Speaker, during a town hall on April 12, 2023, in the middle of the month of Ramadan, the Premier promised Alberta's Muslim community that under her leadership, Muslim Albertans will have access to financing for home ownership under Sharia law, otherwise called halal financing. The Premier reaffirmed her promise in a letter pledging to the implementation of halal financing in Alberta. But 18 months down, can the Premier inform the House of when her government will introduce halal financing in Alberta?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you for the question. I know it isn't tabled yet, but if the members can wait one more week, I think you'll have an answer. So I know you've been very patient, and I've tried to communicate with you behind the scenes, but we're almost there. We'll bring something forward shortly.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Court.
Given that 7 months ago, I asked the Minister of Finance similar questions, and he responded, we have a task force working with the credit unions and other lending institutions to build this product. And given that I've spoken with experts in halal financing and financial institutions in our province, and none of them know who the government is consulting with, can the Premier disclose who the government has consulted? Did the government reach out to institutions like Canadian Halal Financing Corporation, who has been offering this product in the province?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
I can share with this House that there's been extensive consultations. I'd be happy to chat with you about that offline, but we've been working with the financial institution that brought this forward. You know, they came to us and said, hey, can you change some of the regs so that we can offer this financial instrument to the community? We think there's a great need for it. So that's the work that we began, and with a lot of consultation from the community, but I can give you more details offline.
The Honourable Member.
Given that in spring session, the Minister informed the members of this House, and I quote, we are trying to work with all the subsects to make sure we have something that works for everyone. And given that over the summer I've engaged directly with members from the Muslim community, and none of them seems to know what is in the making. Why is the Premier consulting only those who are friends with the UCB instead of undertaking an inclusive consultation with Alberta's Muslim diverse populations?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I've been in this House before where the other side doesn't take no for an answer well, but this is unique that they're having a hard time hearing that it's a yes. We're almost there. There's been much consultation. We've been a facilitator in that consultation because it's been between the financial institution and the community. We're the ones changing the regulations to enable it, and we've been helpful in the consultation process, but it's been theirs.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday is next.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to first send my deepest condolences to the families affected by the unacceptable amounts of deaths of children in care in this province. This summer, 18 young Albertans died while receiving child intervention services, with 89% of those being Indigenous. Any loss of youth in the care of the province is too much and an act of colonial violence against Indigenous peoples. While the Minister of Children and Family Services acknowledged that this is an unconscionable number of Indigenous youth who have died, and will he commit to addressing this as the crisis that it is?
The Honourable Minister of Children and Family Services.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for that question. Mr. Speaker, the death of any child is a horrendous event, and my heart grieves alongside any of the families affected. I want to again stress that any time a serious incident happens to any child within the child intervention system, it's taken extremely seriously. We look at it, we work with the OCYA to look at every possible solution that we can find to make sure that children here in the province are looked after and protected. Mr. Speaker, this is something that is near and dear to my heart, and something I think about each and every day when I'm here at the legislature.
The Honourable Member.
Given that of those who died, 8 were in care, 2 were not, and 8 were receiving post-intervention support, which can be accessed by young adults over 18 who have previously been involved in child intervention. And given that elders, practitioners, and Indigenous leaders have been asking this government to commit to action on addressing this colonial violence against Indigenous peoples, will the minister take a decolonial approach, as has been asked by experts, or will Indigenous peoples expect the status quo where we continue to lose our youth?
The Honourable Minister.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again to the member for that question. Mr. Speaker, since being appointed as Minister of Children and Family Services, I've been meeting with First Nations leaders and community leaders throughout the entire province, looking at ways that we can increase cultural connections, because we know, Mr. Speaker, this makes an incredible difference for the lives of Indigenous children. That's why, Mr. Speaker, I have pledged to meet with any First Nations leader that is looking for additional ways that we can provide programming and services, and that's why we have enhanced family resource networks, Mr. Speaker, and have made strategic investments looking for ways to increase those cultural connections for our Indigenous children.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton West End.
Given that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's very first call to action is to reduce the amount of Indigenous children in care, yet we know that the data shows that in 2017, Indigenous youth made up 61% of youth in Alberta's care. And given that in 2024, following the election of the UCP government, 74% of youth in care are Indigenous. To be clear, that is an increase of 13%. If the UCP is indeed focused on reconciliation, will the minister commit to reduce the number of Indigenous youth in care, or is it all talk and no action?
The Honourable Minister of Children and Family Services.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank you to the member for that question. Mr. Speaker, we are making tangible steps to improve the lives of Indigenous children here in the province. We're ensuring that a cultural plan is developed. We're working with our kinship care providers throughout the entire province to ensure that they have the proper supports that they have or that they require to be able to look after Indigenous children, and we're ensuring that Children and Families Services staff have the skills and cultural understanding to serve the Indigenous families that are so near and dear to our heart. Mr. Speaker, we are making tangible steps to ensure that Indigenous children are looked after, and we will continue to work with Indigenous leaders, families, again, towards a spirit of reconciliation so that we can ensure that our children are looked after.
The Honourable Member for Livingston-McLeod has a question to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Livingston-McLeod is positioned to become a destination for four-season resorts, which can significantly enhance local tourism and drive economic growth for our communities. God's country has breathtaking landscapes and abundant outdoor activities. Our region is ideal for attracting visitors year-round. However, to realize this potential, we must ensure that we have the necessary levels of investment, including infrastructure and fire safety. Can the Minister of Tourism and Sport explain what is being done to attract investment and promote the growth of tourism in my region?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Sport.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member from Livingston-McLeod for that fantastic question. She has a great constituency, and her constituents are lucky to have her. Mr. Speaker, Alberta boasts some of the most beautiful vistas and scenic landscapes around the world, and as a result, we want more people to come and see and visit those. That's why we'll be tabling the All-Season Resort Act later this session to make sure that we are streamlining and reducing red tape barriers for building all-season resorts in this province. We want more people to come to our landscapes, more people to visit, more people to know what we already know best, which is that Alberta is the best place to live, to play, and to visit.
The Honourable Member for Livingston-McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the Minister for that reply. Given the development of resorts could lead to increased tourism and economic benefit, and given it is essential that our local communities are prepared to handle the influx of visitors, and further given this includes expanding infrastructure, including roads, utilities, and more, can the Minister of Transportation and Economic Corridors explain what is being done to address these critical needs to ensure the infrastructure needs of both the residents and the tourists?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Economic Corridors.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to compliment the member from Livingston-McLeod for her tenacious advocacy for transportation projects in her riding. And just to name a few, Mr. Speaker, Highway 22 passing and climbing lanes between Highway 3 and Longview, Highway 22 Wildcat Creek Bridge replacement near Lundbreck currently being built, Highway 3 Rock Creek Wildlife Underpass and fencing that is also being built, Highway 3 twinning from Sentinel to Blairmore with engineering underway, Highway 507 Mill Creek Bridge rehabilitation, and Highway 811 between Highway 3 and Highway 519, Mr. Speaker. Incredible work being done in the member.
The Honourable Member for Livingston-McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister for that response. Given a heightened risk of wildfires in mountainous areas, which pose a significant threat to both the resort areas and surrounding communities, and given that the recent concerning testimony regarding the federal response to the fire in the community of Jasper and Jasper National Park, can the Minister of Forestry and Parks outline what provincial fire safety measures are in place to ensure the growth of safe and sustainable tourism in Livingston-McLeod?
The Honourable Minister of Forestry and Parks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for the question. We've started the Community Fire Guard program that's working hard with communities to make sure that we protect them from wildfire. We know that there's been good work done with Fire Smart in the past, and we know there's more good work to be done protecting our communities and making sure that when visitors come to our province that they can enjoy a safe and enjoyable time in enjoying Alberta's beauty. Thanks.
Honourable members, this concludes the time allotted for oral question period. I would just like to remind members prior to departing the chamber, it is important that no one tweets from inside the assembly, and if you're present and your Twitter account is tweeting, it's very difficult for the speaker to assume that it isn't you and perhaps someone tweeting on your behalf. I would encourage members to govern themselves accordingly. In 30 seconds or less, we'll continue with the remainder of the daily routine. The honourable member for Edmonton, Glenora has a tabling.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and table the requisite number of copies of an excellent briefing document that was shared with me earlier today by members of the Health Science Association of Alberta, and it will be available in the library for all to read. They have 3 very clear asks, Mr. Speaker.
Are there others? Edmonton Highlands, Norwood has a tabling.
Thank you. I rise to table 5 copies of the latest data from September 2024 from Homeward Trust that clearly identifies 4,697 unhoused folks in Edmonton, contradicting the 17 to 1,800 the minister wrongly noted yesterday in question period.
Are there others? The member for Calgary Foothills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to table 5 requisite copies of a letter from a constituent and a teacher of 30 years sent to the Premier's office requesting this government to stop their harmful policies targeting trans and gender diverse youth.
Member for Calgary Edgemont.
I rise to table the 5 requisite documents of a letter from Gemma Hickey, who visited Alberta to receive the Governor-General's Award in commemoration of Person's case to the Premier, inviting for lunch and a meeting, and about the government's harmful anti-trans legislation.
Are there others? Proceed.
Yielding to the clerk, I wish to advise the Assembly that the following document was deposited with the Office of the Clerk on behalf of Honourable Mr. Ellis, Deputy Premier, Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Law Enforcement Review Board 2023 Annual Report.
Honourable members, that brings us to points of order. 202, the Honourable the Official Opposition House Leader rose on a point of order, which she subsequently withdrew. She also rose at 225, the Honourable the Official Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rose at 225. Under 23J in particular, uses abusive or insulting language of a nature likely to create disorder. During this moment, the member for Edmonton Manning was asking a question. The Minister of Community and Social Services was heard to heckle, and I quote, "We've got room for you over here, honey." I rise under the standing orders but also under House of Commons procedures and practice, both unparliamentary language, which is on page 623, the use of offensive, provocative or threatening language in the House is strictly forbidden, personal attacks, insults and obscenities are not in order, as well as names and titles under page 619, where members do not refer to one another by their names but use title, position or constituency. I would suggest a pet name like this is not appropriate. I do believe that it was insulting, and I would ask that the member apologize and withdraw.
The Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did not hear the comments. I would agree with the Opposition House Leader that if that comment was said, that would be language that would not be appropriate and rise to the level of, I think, common debate in this place. So I would have to defer to the member, but I do agree if it was said, and if it was caught and maybe in your record with the Blues or on the ambient microphones, happy to take your direction.
Honourable members, are there others wishing to provide comments? I am prepared to rule, and I do have the benefit of the Blues. The House of Commons Procedures and Practice, page 624 and 25, discusses the principle that the Speaker is unable to rule on a comment that isn't made on the record that he or she did not hear, of which I did not hear such a comment. I agree with the Government House Leader. If he said it, it would be a point of order, and he ought to withdraw it. Having said that, I did not hear that, and so it will not be a point of order, and I will consider the matter dealt with and concluded. Orders of the day, orders du jour.
Under Government Bills and Orders, for second reading, Bill 24, Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024. Honourable Mr. Amory.
Honourable members, before the Assembly is Bill 24 at second reading. Is there anyone wishing to join in the debate? The Honourable the Premier has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to move second reading of Bill 24, the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024, a piece of legislation that will affirm and reaffirm the values that make Alberta one of the freest jurisdictions on the planet. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to standing up for the rights of Albertans, and this legislation is one more way that we're doing that. It is imperative that government recognize the rights of individuals are paramount, and that government must respect those rights. I should probably give a little bit of my framework and history for understanding where we're coming from when I look at the issue of rights. John Locke was a philosopher from 1632 to 1704, and he was the father of our modern liberal democracy. He believed that all people were born with three natural rights, inalienable rights, that were inherent within each individual. The right to life was the first. Number two was the right to liberty, as long as exercising one's liberty did not conflict with the liberty of others. The idea that your right to swing your fist stops where someone else's nose begins. And three, property, the right to own what they create or gain through trade or gift, as long as it doesn't impact another's life or liberty. This was really the foundation of modern liberalism. We have rights that are independent of particular laws. They exist regardless of what the laws are. It's not that the laws grant the rights, it's that the laws codify the rights that already exist. We are naturally, just by the endowment from the Creator, we are naturally free and equal. We have a social contract, though. This is the other part of Locke's understanding, where we agree to give up some part of our liberty, some part of our rights in exchange for the protection of those said rights and the protection of the public good. But he also pointed out that rulers who fail to protect those rights may be removed and replaced. That's the very foundation of democracy. It's why we have elections every few years, so that the people can render their judgment on how we do in protecting these foundational freedoms. So, Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Bill of Rights was first introduced in 1972. It was a full decade before the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it was introduced on the heels of the 1960 Diefenbaker Bill of Rights. But since that time, despite society evolving, the Bill of Rights hasn't changed that much. And if the Bill of Rights doesn't reflect the lessons learned and the changes needed today, then it loses its power. And Albertans are at risk of having their rights overlooked and overruled. We think this is unacceptable, and that's why I'm so pleased that the Minister of Justice has tabled amendments that will protect Albertans' personal autonomy, their property, and their expression. Mr. Speaker, these amendments stem from recommendations, in part, from the Public Health Emergencies Governance Review Panel that we created to review the legislation and governance practices of government during the COVID-19 pandemic. And these amendments relate to those recommendations to better protect Albertans' rights and to better align the Act with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and with natural law. And I mention this because the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has an important section, Section 26. And what it says is the guarantee in this Charter of certain rights and freedoms shall not be construed as denying the existence of any other rights or freedoms that exist in Canada. It allows for the fact that it might not be a complete list. And unfortunately, from time to time, the courts have acted as if certain rights don't exist as a result of them not being enumerated. So we're going to fix that, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the Act, one of the first things that we're changing is the preamble. And I want to read this into the record so you understand the framework that we're coming from in doing this exercise on this side. Whereas the free and democratic society existing in Alberta is founded on principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God and the rule of law, and on principles fostered by tradition that honor and respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, the dignity and worth of the human person, and the position of the family in a society of free people and free institutions. And whereas human rights and fundamental freedoms are of foundational importance to Alberta society, including during times of emergency. There's two things that are underscored in this, Mr. Speaker. One is that these are rights endowed to each of us by virtue of being human. They are not rights that are granted by this legislature. They are granted by virtue of being human. They are inalienable. And it also, they don't get suspended in times of emergency. Rights being inalienable exist at all times. So, Mr. Speaker, there are a few areas that we found in recent years that governments haven't necessarily respected this overarching edict. And the first, I would say, is in the area of property rights. And the Speaker may know that I began as a property rights advocate all the way back in 1997 as the founding director of the Canadian Property Rights Research Institute. And one of the things I learned at that time, studying Locke and others, was that there was an omission in our Bill of Rights. They currently include the right of individuals to the enjoyment of property and the right not to be deprived of this enjoyment except by due process of the law. But one thing that was missing is that the taking of property should also come with just compensation. If the public is going to benefit from taking private property, the public should pay for it. If you take something that is not yours without paying for it, it is theft. And this government will not stand for that to occur. So what we are going to change in the Bill of Rights is that the law of Alberta means an act that is enacted before or after the commencement of this act. Any order, rule, or regulation made under it is subject to be repealed, abolished, or altered by the legislature. But importantly, the taking of property means in respect of real or personal property. Real property is real estate. Personal property is movable property, and I'll say more about firearms in a moment. But a transfer of ownership of property without the consent of the owner, that is called a taking. And number two, an owner of property being deprived of all reasonable uses of that property. That will also be deemed to be a taking of property, which then has to be subject to fair compensation. The amendments will make Alberta a leader in the area of property rights. I can continue on because one of the things that we are going to modify under Section 4 is that currently it states that liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property are protected. We're going to change that to liberty and security of the person, but make it even more clear how important we believe protecting property rights are by adding the right to the enjoyment of property and the right not to be deprived thereof, except to the extent authorized by law and except by due process of law. And importantly, number A, sub 2, the right not to be subject to a taking of property except to the extent authorized by law and where just compensation is provided. We think that this is going to recalibrate the relationship between provincial governments and all those who get the power through provincial legislation to ensure that every action that they take is done through a lens of ensuring that they respect the property rights of those that they govern. The other area where we think is vitally important for us to regulate on is the right of an individual with capacity not to be subjected to or coerced into receiving medical care, medical treatment, or a medical procedure without consent. Now, there's two parts to this issue, Mr. Speaker, and I'll explain why it is that it's separated into two. So under the amendments that you'll see, sub H, the right of the individual with capacity not to be subjected to or coerced into receiving medical care, medical treatment, or a medical procedure without the consent of that individual, unless that individual is likely to cause substantial harm to that individual or to others. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we have a very serious addiction crisis in this province, and we've already indicated that we are going to begin consultation on compassionate intervention, which would be taking a person who is causing harm to themselves or others and incapable of making decisions in their own best interests and ordering them into treatment so that we can restore their individual agency so we can get them on with their lives. So this language that we're using is specifically to allow for the fact that watching somebody slowly kill themselves is not something that we will do in a free and democratic society. We're going to make sure those folks get treatment. However, notwithstanding that, we believe that the right to the individual with capacity should not be subjected to or coerced into receiving a vaccine without the consent of that individual. We felt it was really important to identify that particularly, Mr. Speaker, because I think that what we observed in recent years is that was not a provision that was honored by the provincial government. And we heard about it from our citizens, and they wanted us to correct that. And so we are correcting that in law, that a person will always have the right to be able to say yes or no to getting a vaccine. Remember, vaccines will be and will remain an individual choice. You take a vaccine to protect yourself. That's why we want to make sure that every person is able to talk to their doctor, talk to their medical professional, and be able to get the advice that makes the most sense for them. But you cannot coerce others to take any medical procedure that they do not wish to take. We have to remember, why is this necessary? Well, back in the day, the NDP were proposing going door to door with teams of health professionals to coerce people into getting jabs at the door at a cost, I think they estimated at the time, of $45 million. Well, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, this government will never do that. And this is our guarantee. This is why we're bringing forward this amendment and putting it into law. I should also mention, Mr. Speaker, that there is another important omission that we find in the current Bill of Rights, and this is on the issue of firearms, a type of personal property. Amendments will be introduced to reinforce an individual's right to acquire, to keep, and to use firearms in accordance with the law. The amendment reaffirms our commitment to standing up for lawful firearms owners in Alberta. You may wish to know, Mr. Speaker, that there are 362,000 possession and acquisition license holders in Alberta, 10% of the adult population, including myself, I must tell you, Mr. Speaker. It also affirms that our government's intent that provincial laws should not interfere with the right of law-abiding firearms owners who purchase and use their firearms legally. We will continue to advocate to the federal government against their unfair restrictions on lawful firearms owners. We believe the federal government has an important role to play in making sure they address the criminal use of firearms. And there's lots of criminal uses. You see firearms being smuggled across the border. You see them used by organized crime. You see them used by gangs. You see them used in the commission of a crime. We accept that that is a role for the federal government to play. But we also have a long history in this province of hunting, of sports shooting, of collecting, of farmers and ranchers using it as a tool to maintain and protect their property against predators. And those are the legal uses, the safe uses, that we will continue to support and enforce in Alberta. One of the things that I would point out is that under our Constitution, Alberta does retain the right to legislate in areas of property and civil rights. And that is the reason why we are asserting our right to be able to make changes in this regard and make sure that we're protecting our law-abiding firearms owners. One other area, the Alberta Bill of Rights, has a slight omission, is it already includes the right to freedom of speech. But the Public Health Emergencies Governance Review Panel recommended that we add freedom of expression beyond written and spoken language, and we are. What might this include? Well, somebody recently gave me a very funny editorial cartoon. It was pillorying me a little bit, but you know what? That's okay in a free and democratic society. Artists have the right to be able to express themselves in their work. It may not always be through the written and spoken language, and we want to make sure that that is affirmed as well in law. I should also mention, Mr. Speaker, that when talking about the role that this will play in, I think, creating a new relationship between ourselves and the courts, I would say a couple of things. Number one, the application of this bill is going to be only to the legislature and government of Alberta in respect to all matters within the authority of the legislature of Alberta. We recognize that we have a lane, but I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, you've probably already seen this, we intend to ensure that every area that we are responsible for, we're going to exercise our full authority. So that would be number one. Number two, I would say that when looking at how this legislation is gauged relative to others, it is a statute, and as it has been indicated, that statutes can be revised and they can be in conflict with other laws, but we are putting it in clear language that this law has paramountcy. Paramountcy means that any law of Alberta that is inconsistent with the provisions of this Act is to the extent of the inconsistency of no force in effect. What this means is it takes precedence over all other laws passed by this chamber. I should also mention that there is an opportunity, if any future government decides that they want to be explicit, if there is an area that might conflict with the law, they have to be explicit in doing so by saying that it operates notwithstanding this Act. And I am quite certain that there will be very few areas, Mr. Speaker, where that will apply. Mr. Speaker, I believe deeply in the principles of individual freedom and responsibility that have guided and built this province for generations. This updated Alberta Bill of Rights will ensure that our province continues to be home to freedom, to democracy, and a way of life that we have come to cherish. I'm so proud of the amendments before us in this Legislative Assembly, and I look forward to some robust debate. These updates are not only changes that Albertans are asking for, they are changes that ensure that every day, no matter the situation, every one of us can be confident of our rights and freedoms, that they will be protected and supported. That's why I'm pleased to move second reading of the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendments Act, Mr. Speaker.
Any other members wishing to join the debate? I see the member from Calgary, Boular-McCall has risen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to speak to Bill 24, and I would start my comments by saying rights are important. There is no disagreement. They are the cornerstone of a free and democratic society, and we should respect them, we should protect them. Albertans want us to stand up for their rights. Premier mentioned natural rights, right to life, liberty, right to property, and since that time, I guess we have come a long way towards the establishment of civil society and modern liberalism. And since then, there have been many developments. I won't go over all of them. But in the context of Canada, I will say that we are fortunate to be living in Canada, where we have a comprehensive framework of rights that is enshrined in our Constitution. That's the highest order of the law in Canada. That's the supreme law of the land, Constitution, and it protects our freedoms and our rights. And it's fairly comprehensive. It protects freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of opinion, freedom of expression. It protects like fundamental freedoms and democratic rights. It also protects our legal rights, right to life, liberty, and security of the person. It also protects our right to equality. It protects us from state overreach, from unreasonable search, from arbitrary detention, and when citizens are up against states, it also protects their right to legal counsel. Many of these rights were initially signed onto by Canada under the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. And around that time, in the 60s, there was Canadian Bill of Rights, there was Alberta Bill of Rights, like in 72, but all these documents predate Charter. And one could say that based on those documents, based on those ideas, Charter was put together and it was made part of the Constitution to make sure that these rights are protected for every Canadian, for every Albertan, for everyone wherever they are living in this great and vast country. Premier mentioned the amendments that they will affirm and reaffirm the values that we hold dear. And I think that the values the Canadians hold dear is their charter rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution. And that's the set of universal rights, that's the set of universal freedoms that binds us together as Canadians. This amendments, which is mostly symbolic, reaffirms most of these rights that are guaranteed in the Charter of Rights and Freedom. For instance, the right of the individual with capacity not to be subjected, coerced into receiving medical care, medical treatment. Section 7 rights, right to life, liberty, and security of person. There is a whole jurisprudence on that section alone, how that section protects Canadians, Albertans' right to life, right to liberty, and right to security of the person. And there is case law that explains that that right to security of person in fact includes medical treatments. If you will subject somebody to a medical treatment that they do not consent to, that will be offside the right protected by the Charter. There may also be remedies in civil court as well that will amount to a battery if some medical professional is subjecting to some kind of forced treatment. So our laws do protect that. Similarly, the bill talks about that any individual with capacity not to be subjected or coerced into receiving vaccines. I think I will talk about that as well in the comments that Premier made, but I would say that the UCP continues to focus on anti-vaccine positions rather than addressing the real needs of Albertans. And these amendments appear appear to be nothing but just virtue signaling ahead of the UCP AGM on November 2nd. And I will explain why that's the case. In Alberta, anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, there is no history of mandatory vaccinations.
That's right.
There is no history of that. And in fact, in 2021, UCP government, this government, made changes to health statutes to make sure that there are no mandatory vaccinations in Alberta. So the law as it stands now in Alberta is that there is no mandatory vaccination. No person can be forced, no person can be coerced into receiving mandatory vaccination. That's the law of the land. And this provision uses the word capacity, and Premier gave a very liberal interpretation of that word, which courts may or may not agree with, and they would look at it when it reaches the courts. But I don't think that this creates anything new, because law already says that there is no mandatory vaccination in Alberta. Second thing, Premier is talking about individual rights, protecting their autonomy, but they're creating that exception so that they could force individual into receiving addiction treatment. I do understand that addiction is a huge issue. It's impacting many individuals. It's impacting our communities. And there are a lot of things that government can and must do to address that. But at the same time, like starting from idea of natural rights and going straight into picking up people from streets and forcibly putting them into treatment center will also run afoul to the Premier's idea of individual liberties and freedoms. There are many things that we can do on recovery front, harm reduction front, enforcement front. That would require this government willing to engage with experts, willing to engage with those who know this area, and work with them, leaving their ideology aside. So again, I think it's just another virtue signal to the UCP base that they are showing something which was already done by the previous, I guess, version of the UCP in 2021. And the rationale Premier provided that there was campaign by NDP that we should go door to door and give people a jab, as if we were holding those syringes and asking people to go door to door. What that meant was that due to the conspiracy theories which were given credence by many right-wing politicians, there was vaccine hesitancy. Idea was to give people information, ask them to talk to their health professional, and at times, I think it was important to meet them where they are at. And then the same UCP government did in fact take that suggestion, did in fact set up community clinics at different community centers, in Genesis Center in my riding, at the Shmesh Culture Center in my riding, at many community places to facilitate people. And certainly, those were not, I guess, supervised by politicians. Calgary area health professionals were there to provide that service. And as a result, 99.3% of people in Upper Northeast decided to get vaccinated, as compared to 82% for overall Alberta. That was the result of that awareness campaign. That was the result of facilitating people to make that choice. Again, there was nobody was forcing anyone to take vaccine. That would be against laws of Alberta. That would be against people's charter rights. And then Premier often talks about staying in her lane, but the right to acquire, keep, and use firearms in accordance with law, I think it's a good advice. It doesn't change the law in Alberta. It's a really good advice that whenever you want to acquire firearms, you should do so in accordance with the law. And that law will be set by the federal government because it's in their constitutional jurisdiction. Whatever the law they make, that will be applicable here, and people should follow the law. That's what rule of law means. It's a good advice, but it's not creating any rights. In many people in Alberta from academia have warned that this might give people a false impression that somehow they now have some newly created right. There is potential that it may be misunderstood. So, again, it's virtue signaling, which can be dangerous. And while these rights were discussed in this bill, there are many rights that are not touched on in this bill, existing rights that people already have. Day before yesterday on Sunday, I had a town hall in my riding, and people from many different communities, many different backgrounds, for different walks of life, came to share their concerns, came to share their priorities, and certain themes that emerged throughout the evening were that people want to have access to health care. It's their right. Yep. If they are sick, if their loved one is sick, they have right to have timely access to proper health care. And what we are hearing under this UCP government, there are close to 1 million Albertans who do not have access to family doctor. That's what's going on under this UCP watch to Albertans' right to access health care. Then people have right to quality public education as well. And what we are seeing in our communities, every single school is operating over capacity. 35 to 45 kids are being crammed into one classroom, and their right to quality education is being compromised under this UCP watch. Also, if we are talking about the property, There are many Albertans who are struggling to have a roof on their head. Just outside this building in the city of Edmonton, close to 5,000 Albertans don't have a safe place to call home. There are record people across this province struggling to find an affordable home. And I think Albertans have the right to a safe, affordable place to call home. And government has ignored that right as well. Under this UCP watch, post-secondary education has been out of reach for many, except few who can afford it. People have right to quality education, to university education. That right is in jeopardy under this government's watch. People also have right to dental care. People also have right to reproductive health and reproductive care. Even when another order of government is willing to work with this government to make sure people have access to those services, this government is just there to grandstand and not work in public interest. At the end of the day, Albertans have a right to live a life of dignity, of respect. And what we are seeing as priority for this government, that their first bill will be just designed as a virtue signaling to secure leadership vote for this premier. There are 3 more bills that government share will be coming. And those will take away rights of the most vulnerable in this province. In fact, they will put their lives in danger too. Although Premier wants us to believe that this has something to do with Albertans' right, no. It's all about this Premier, this government's politics. The UCP doesn't respect Albertans and their rights, and I think we will be bringing forward changes to make this bill a bit better. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The member from Grand Prairie has risen to speak.
Well, thank you very, very much, Mr. Speaker. Greatly appreciate the opportunity to rise in this House this session. Mr. Speaker, I want to just rise and speak to about Albertans, about what this really means, about the Alberta Bill of Rights, and about some of our conservative values, too, as well, that I believe are Albertan values. I believe that when we speak about Albertans' values, we talk about freedom. We talk about personal choice and individual responsibility. And, Mr. Speaker, these values present the foundation of Albertans about our identity and guide us in our governance of this great province. These are key aspects for us to be able to lead this province. These are key beliefs that Albertans have across our province, and they expect us to hold these values as well. Yeah. And we believe in the freedom to make our own choices, take responsibility for our lives, for our futures, and make the best choices for ourselves and our families. And this is so key. And whether in rural or urban Alberta, we share a spirit of hard work, of can-do attitude, and entrepreneurial spirit. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to speak for a moment on the position of the family. It's just so key in this that not just parents, but the whole family unit is the healthiest and best way forward for Albertans to become and grow throughout their lives. And I think as part of this, I think of my own upbringing, Mr. Speaker, as a younger child, spending time on the ranch, learning to ride, in construction and farming. There's been multiple opportunities for me to experience multiple opportunities to grow, to experience encouragement, to experience care, experience the opportunity to be trained in various skill sets. When I was on the farm, Mr. Speaker, when I was 15 years old, I had the opportunity to actually develop the skill sets, develop some leadership skill sets, and be able to train the other farm workers on our farm. Pretty impressive, I think, for a 15-year-old. But what was key there is that the community came around, multiple people built into me, and in that instance, I was able to build into other people too and train other individuals. The interesting part for this is a couple of them didn't speak English. And so this has been a long history for myself as well, working with international people who are coming to Alberta, being able to train them and also participate in heritage with them. Along with this, in my constituency, in Grand Prairie and in the surrounding area, we have strong industry. And some of the forestry, agriculture, and energy industries have allowed us to develop a really robust, thriving economy. And we are heavy hitters right across this province. We contribute significantly in large ways to local business, in patents, entrepreneurs coming out of Grand Prairie and the surrounding areas, and many also technological improvements. And not just Grand Prairie, but the surrounding area does this in too. We continue to drive forward this passion of hard work, can-do attitude, and entrepreneurial spirit. And we are builders of strong Albertans and of doers, Mr. Speaker. And these principles of freedom, personal responsibility, and the opportunities that come from this responsibility, and along with some focus on red tape reduction, have given hardworking Albertans the freedom to build and grow their businesses, make significant contributions to us socially and economically, and continue to choose family values and be able to pursue these values. I think of many companies. Well, one company in Grand Prairie, a tech company in the energy industry, that has streamlined how they're measuring and energy across northern Alberta, and the digitalization of that. It's just there's incredible talent, there's incredible patents, and there's incredible work happening in our area. But this all just really comes down to those values, those can-do attitude, that hard work and entrepreneurial spirit that Albertans value here in this province. And this is about the very foundation. These values are built on the very foundation of what we are talking about today in the Bill of Rights. Now, freedom, particularly, Mr. Speaker, is very important concerning health care. And so I firmly believe that the government should not be dictating the personal medical decisions we make. And this is a relationship of trust between an individual and their primary care provider, Mr. Speaker. Individuals in Alberta should be allowed to choose whether to receive vaccination or any other medical procedure. And when we do this, Mr. Speaker, we allow trust to be built. We allow trust to be built between that individual and future health decisions that they have to make with their primary care provider. I think of myself when I was rodeoing and I broke my ribs. I got stepped on by in a rodeo. It was the first rodeo we ever convinced my grandma to come to. And Mr. Speaker, she's got this amazing photo of me getting not just bucked off, but the cow stepping on my ribs. So that's hanging on the wall, Mr. Speaker. But I bring that up because the amount of medical care that I received, I believe I was 13 or 14 years old at that point, just built trust. I had to get shipped off to another city just to make sure I didn't have any internal damage. But that just built trust because they chose the opportunity, and we were able to choose that way forward too as well. Or when I broke my collarbone in the great constituency of Livingston-McLeod, so up on the ski hill there. Great response by the locals, both on the ski hill and at the local hospital there. So each one of these things, when we allow individuals to dictate and be able to have their own choice in this opportunity, along with their primary care provider, allows that trust to be built. Mr. Speaker, this is about building trust with Albertans. It's about building trust and allowing continued trust in our healthcare system between doctors and also, or I should say primary care providers and patients, between Alberta, everyone involved. And so this is a key piece of legislation that I believe we need to continue to move forward. It's very key. Now, Mr. Speaker, we also, this must include freedom of speech. Albertans do discuss. We have thriving debates, we have thriving conversations, and we Albertans want to be able to discuss, debate, and be able to disagree in discourse with each other without fearing the punishment of censorship. This is what the Bill of Rights is also about, making sure that we have the freedom of speech, the freedom of discourse, and the ability to go out and, I believe, change people's minds for the better here on the Conservative side. And respecting freedom of speech means protecting the right to question, discuss, and pursue the best path forward. This freedom of expression empowers individuals and strengthens public trust and accountability. This is super key. I believe as a young man, as a homeschooled individual, I saw that this was very much brought up into my education, and we spent significant time debating and also with rigorous debate, and I believe that was very key to this whole conversation. Now, part of this too as well is firearm ownership. We have a proud tradition, Mr. Speaker, of proud firearm owners here in this province, and especially in rural areas, but even in cities and small, like myself in Grand Prairie. And while many Albertans do depend on firearm ownership for managing farmland and deterring predators and ensuring the safety of their livestock, I can think of many times as a young man I spent time shooting tin cans with my father, spending good times on a Sunday afternoon, and enjoying the sport of shooting, and as well as protecting our cattle as well. So I can think of these great opportunities in sport as well as the use of a firearm for the appropriate action. Yes. Yes, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, through to the member, for allowing an intervention on the topic of this bill, the human rights amendments that we're bringing forward. The member has spoken repeatedly throughout, whether he's talking about free speech or about property rights surrounding access to firearms, responsible gun ownership, that there is always, with rights, a relationship to responsibility. I wonder if the member could speak more, especially on this topic surrounding property rights and firearms, and also freedom of speech, how when there exists a right, there is a corollary and counterpart of responsibility that exists always, that this is true even if the law doesn't articulate that right, that responsibility exists in society nonetheless, by virtue of you having the ability, God-given, right to do X, Y, and Z that we're articulating now in the law with this amendment.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much just for that question. I greatly appreciate it. I think of my time on the farm, where we would spend significant time, obviously, not just harvesting, but also spending a lot of time in the tractor, planting, or for us, it was a lot of hay farming. Sending hay actually right across the world. So the farm I worked on, we had some top grade hay, putting it in small bales, and part of this was also sending it for racehorses in England. And so the farm I worked on, we would make sure that we would harvest during the right weather conditions, but also we would be sending away our hay for sampling to make sure it also had the right minerals that racehorses needed in order to give them the best shot of winning those races. Now, that doesn't start just at the cut. That doesn't just start at the end product. It starts far before with a lot of planning to make sure that you have the right minerals and nutrients in the soil. And this is much of what this is about too as well. Landowners want to be able to take care of their land. And so to be able to take care, have the clear direction as this legislation presents, to be able to long-term look after. Mr. Speaker, I don't know a single farmer or rancher that doesn't leave their land in a better spot. And they take that responsibility very, very strongly to make sure that their land is left better for their whoever comes after, whether that's family or that gets sold to another person, but to make sure that that land is better at the end of it. So, Mr. Speaker, I really appreciate the minister's question. Thank you so very much for that. But this builds upon that ability and strength of those landowners to be able to continue to improve their land across Alberta. So, continuing on as well, I do want to just talk about a little bit more about firearms too as well. I think of one of my family members who actually, as a young man, I believe he was 14, 15, tied the Alberta record for for trap shooting. So it's been a few years now, but I just think of that. There's enjoyment in the sport, and it needs to be continued to be protected, Mr. Speaker. And I do believe that responsible gun ownership just builds on those foundations of that education component, that training component, and respect for safety. And this freedom and responsibility go hand in hand, Mr. Speaker, in this. And I think Albertans understand this, and this is why we're putting this in. Now, however, Mr. Speaker, we see in Ottawa, Prime Minister Trudeau and his NDP allies consider firearms a threat to public safety. This is greatly concerning to us. This stance has tragically failed to curb crime on the streets. Since the federal government's recent ban on handguns, violent gun crime has risen across the country, particularly in major cities. The Toronto Police Association has reported a 45% increase in shootings and a 62% rise in gun-related homicides in Toronto compared to last year. Mr. Speaker, this is appalling. Mr. Speaker, the federal government needs to continue to see that responsible gun ownership is key to this problem. It is not legal gun owners that are causing these problems, Mr. Speaker. It is the use of illegal weapons across Canada. And he just fails to see and recognize that banning firearms for law-abiding Albertans will not improve urban gun violence outcomes. He sees sweeping federal mandates aimed at generalizing gun violence unfairly punish the responsible gun owners in Alberta. We see this, Mr. Speaker, that his sweeping mandates are not fair. They only target people who have gone through an incredibly hard process to acquire a firearm. Interestingly, it's harder to get a gun license in Alberta than it is to get blanking on it. No, not driver's license. The other one used for travel. Visa. Thank you. So your passport. So it is easier to get a passport in Canada than it is to get a license to buy a gun, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do continue to believe that our provincial government must continue to stand up to the Liberal NDP coalition in Ottawa. Yeah. We have the responsibility, Mr. Speaker, to push back against policies that undermine Western values, Albertan values, and disregard Alberta. Disregard Albertans and their rights to do this, to be able to use guns responsibly. Mr. Speaker, a sensible federal government should work within the parameters of the federal and provincial jurisdictions set out in our Constitution. Their blanket policies fail to address the root cause of crime and unfairly undermine individuals' responsibility. Rights that we are upholding in Alberta right now. Overreaching regulation only erodes the rights of law-abiding citizens when failing to address the actual causes of gun violence, which have nothing to do with rural Albertans who are responsibly using their firearms. And concerning the need to reduce violence, our United Conservative government favors specific legislation solutions rather than blanket policies which unfairly restrict responsible persons. The responsible gun owners of Alberta accept the personal and legal responsibility associated with safe gun storage, use, and transportation. And we will continue to oppose Ottawa's overreach into the rights of responsible Albertan gun ownership. And our government is committed to protecting these freedoms cherished by Albertans right across Alberta, and particularly in many of our rural communities, because they are essential to the character of our province. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to rise in this chamber today to support Bill 24, and I truly believe these amendments will continue to make Alberta one of the freest jurisdictions in the world. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak? I will recognize the member for Lacombe-Panoka.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am honoured today to rise as a UCP MLA. To speak to the proposed amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights as contained in Bill 24. This bill is a significant step in our commitment to protecting the personal freedoms and individual rights of all Albertans. The folks that chose me to represent them have made it clear that they expect their government to respect and protect their fundamental rights. After all, these rights are necessary in a free and democratic society. Today, I will speak to the essential freedoms these amendments seek to preserve and protect, including greater autonomy in healthcare decisions, the protection of private property, and the lawful acquisition and responsible use of firearms. Before I begin, I want to highlight that the Alberta Bill of Rights has been an important tool for holding the government accountable since 1972. However, it has not been significantly updated since then, and our society has evolved considerably since then. The amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights being introduced by Bill 24 would make certain that it continues to serve Albertans well in an evolving world. The amendments reinforce our government's commitment to personal autonomy, including when it comes to health care. Albertans deserve the assurance that their health care choices belong to them. These amendments enshrine the right for every Albertan with the capacity to do so to make personal health decisions in the way that respects personal autonomy. Healthcare decisions have become increasingly complex and in some cases even politicized. Albertans should never feel pressured or coerced into receiving a vaccination or any other medical procedure. I would like to add that many of the proposed amendments in the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act relate to recommendations from the Public Health Emergencies Governance Review Panel. This expert panel reviewed the legislation and the governance practices of government during the COVID-19 public health emergency. Almost a year ago, the panel provided the government with a report containing many recommendations, and many of the proposed amendments in the Bill of Rights relate to recommendations the panel made to improve protections for Albertans and better align the Alberta Bill of Rights with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Alberta's government believes in empowering its people, not restricting them. Personal autonomy in healthcare is fundamental to individual dignity, a right we proudly uphold through these amendments. The next cornerstone of these amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights is the protection of private property. For generations, Albertans have held private property rights as essential to freedom and to prosperity. Our land, our homes, and our assets represent the hard work, the dedication, and investment of individuals and families who have contributed to the growth and the strength of our province. Reinforcing these protections sends a clear message. Alberta stands for the rights of those who work and save and invest, and we're dedicated to ensuring that what Albertans have earned remains under their control, safe from overreach or unwarranted claims. Land and property ownership is important to many cultures and people of this province. It is simply a no-brainer to ensure that these rights are protected to the utmost degree. Alberta's growth has always been driven by individuals free to invest, expand, and contribute. Restricting or hampering property rights would only restrict innovation and growth, placing unnecessary burdens on those who drive our economy and are building our communities. Our goal is an Alberta where businesses can thrive, where new Albertans are welcomed, and where property ownership is secure, free from overreach. The proposed amendments in Bill 24 would expand property rights. If passed, government would be required to compensate individuals or businesses if government took ownership of their property or if a law deprived the individual or business of all reasonable uses of their property. I should also point out the proposed amended Bill of Rights would serve as an additional tool for Albertans to challenge a government decision. If passed, individuals could challenge the decision under the Charter, the Bill of Rights, or both. And before I move to my last point, it's important to note that the amended Bill of Rights would not contradict anything in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and this is important. Lastly, I want to address the last key component of these amendments, the right to lawful acquisition and responsible use of firearms. Alberta, and my family, has a proud tradition of firearm ownership rooted in the heritage of hunters, farmers, and responsible sports people. This amendment does not challenge federal legislation. Rather, it protects Albertans' rights within the framework of the law. We believe Albertans who obtain proper permits and handle firearms responsibly should feel confident in their right to own and to use them. Firearms are integral to Alberta's rural lifestyle and hunting traditions, and I know, coming from a hunting family where I grew up on wild meat, these amendments reinforce our respect for these traditions, acknowledging the value of safe and legal firearm ownership. Let me be clear, we are not promoting unrestricted access or irresponsible ownership of firearms. Our government respects lawful firearm regulations, and nothing in these amendments contradicts those laws. Instead, we're safeguarding the rights of law-abiding Albertans and honouring those who handle firearms responsibly and legally. In Canada, we have one of the highest rates of civilian firearm ownership. Actually, according to World Population Review, Canada ranks in the top 10 countries globally with 34.7 firearms per 100 people. Canada's stringent licensing process, as we've heard from my colleague, requires applicants to pass both written and practical tests, which I have done, face waiting periods, and undergo daily background checks. Despite these strict standards, recent Statistics Canada data and testimony from police chiefs show that most firearm-related crimes are committed with illegal firearms, not those legally bought and registered. We will continue to fight against unfair restrictions on lawful firearm owners by the federal government. And through the amendments proposed in Bill 24, we reinforce our commitment to standing up for lawful firearms owners in Alberta. In closing, the Alberta Bill of Rights is more than a legal document. It's a statement of our province's values. These amendments reinforce our commitment to individual autonomy in healthcare, to the safeguarding of private property, and to the responsible legal use of firearms. We're standing up for an Alberta that prizes freedom and responsibility, where rights are respected and communities thrive because individuals have the liberty to live as they choose. This is Alberta's identity, and this is Alberta's legacy. And this is what we are protecting today. I urge every member of this Assembly to move and vote in favour of Bill 24, the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any others wishing to speak to Bill 24? I recognize the member for Livingston-McLeod.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Chamber and all Albertans, I stand before you to address an issue of great importance: our government's commitment to protecting the basic rights of Albertans through the proposed amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights contained in Bill 24. The protection of these rights is not just a legal obligation, it's a moral priority that lies at the very heart of our free and democratic province. Albertans expect their government to respect and safeguard their rights and freedoms, and I'm so proud to say that our government is taking decisive action to ensure that this happens. I've had the privilege of engaging with my constituents on various issues, and a constant theme has emerged: a strong desire for the government to enhance its effort in protecting their rights. I know that many members of this House have heard similar sentiments echoed by folks in the constituencies they represent. The message is clear. Albertans want assurance that their rights will be upheld, and they want the government to stand as guardian for those rights. In response to these concerns, our government has listened. We recognize that since the enactment of the Alberta Rights in 1972, significant changes have occurred in our society, and it's crucial that our laws evolve accordingly. The amendments introduced in this House through Bill 24 are designed to ensure that this critical piece of legislation continues to serve Albertans effectively in an ever-changing world. Now let's look at the proposed amendments in detail. One of the most significant changes is the reinforcement of personal autonomy, particularly regarding medical choice. The amendment will preserve the right of every Albertan who has the capacity to do so, to make their own decision about medical treatments. This amendment has been informed by the recommendations of the Public Health Emergencies Government Review Panel. This expert panel conducted a thorough review of legislation and governance practices during the COVID-19 health event. Their report, presented to our government nearly a year ago, provided valuable insights and recommendations aimed at improving protections for Albertans and better aligning the Bill of Rights with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is not just about public health. It's about respecting the inherent dignity of each individual, and affirming their right to make their own choices regarding the medical treatment they receive. Another important amendment now, Bill 24 aims to clarify and strengthen the rights surrounding lawful firearm ownership. For many Albertans, firearms are an essential part of life, integral for recreation, agricultural, and personal safety. The proposed changes will ensure that provincial laws do not interfere with the right to own legally acquired firearms in accordance with the law. We must stand firm against any unjust federal restrictions that target responsible and legal firearm owners. By protecting these rights, we honor the traditions that are deeply rooted in our communities while recognizing the realities in everyday Albertans' lives. In addition to these first two amendments, we will also look to bolster property rights, a cornerstone of our democracy and way of life. The amended Bill of Rights will guarantee that no Albertan can be deprived of their property without legal authorization and just compensation. Property rights empower individuals to build wealth, invest in their communities, and create opportunities for themselves and their families. It is our duty to ensure that these rights are not only protected, but strengthened, providing Albertans with the security they need to thrive. These amendments are not merely a response to recent events. They are a proactive step towards ensuring that Albertans have the tools necessary to challenge government decisions that infringe upon their rights. The amended Bill of Rights will empower individuals to seek justice and fairness, reinforcing the belief that our government is ultimately accountable to the people it serves. Furthermore, the proposed changes will guarantee that the Alberta Bill of Rights applies not only to laws, but also to all provincial government actions, including policies and programs. This is a vital update that recognizes the reality of how government operates. By expanding the scope of the Bill of Rights, we are safeguarding that all forms of government action are subject to the same rigorous standards that protect individual rights. As we move forward with these amendments, it is crucial to remember that they do not undermine the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Rather, they complement it and enhance it. Our goal is to create a stronger framework for protecting individual freedoms, one that reflects the unique values and aspirations of Albertans. As well, these amendments will reaffirm the importance of freedom of expression. In a time when diverse viewpoints must be respected and protected, it is essential that we preserve the right to express oneself without fear. Freedom of expression is fundamental to our democracy, and it must be safeguarded to ensure a vibrant and engaged citizen. To put it bluntly, the amendments before us today reflect our unwavering dedication to the principles of individual freedom, property rights, and responsible gun ownership. They are a reaffirmation of our values as Albertans. Our government is fully committed to protecting the values and way of life that make Alberta such a great place to live, and these amendments are a testament to that commitment. Collectively, we can ensure that the Alberta Bill of Rights remains a strong protector of the freedoms we hold close. Let us stand united in our resolve to safeguard the rights of every individual in our province. As we consider these amendments, let us remember the individuals and families who depend on us to uphold their rights. Let us listen to their stories and recognize the importance of these principles in their lives. We are here to serve the people of Alberta and protect the rights and freedoms that define our way of life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my fellow members for your attention on this vital issue. Let us ensure that Alberta remains a place where individual freedoms are cherished and upheld. I urge every member of this Assembly to vote in favour of Bill 24, the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. Thank you.
You're here. I recognize the member from Vermilion, Lloydminster, Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in the House to support the amendments put forward for the Alberta Bill of Rights. The amendments proposed for the Bill of Rights listed in Bill 24 will enshrine and protect the fundamental rights and freedoms that many Albertans hold dear. Rights and freedoms are an integral part of our culture. The Alberta Bill of Rights was introduced all the way back in 1972 as a way to protect Alberta freedoms of religion, freedom of speech, and many others freedoms that we take for granted today. I want to read to the House what is currently written in our Alberta Bill of Rights, something I find very important to note, something that must be protected. The right of the individual to liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property, and the right not to be deprived thereof except by due process of law. Our leader, the Honourable Premier, and our party have stated that Alberta was built on the principles of individual freedoms and responsibilities. And through these proposed amendments, we are strongly reinforcing these foundations. The proposed amendment states that every law in Alberta must be interpreted and applied in a manner that does not limit or interfere with the rights enshrined in the Alberta Bill of Rights. It is essential to remember as a government that all Albertans have the freedom to choose, which includes responsible Albertans making their own choice, their own medical decisions. We must ensure that medical freedom remains in the hands of the individual, which is why the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights ties to the personal autonomy and context of medical care. If the individual has capacity, they should not have their medical decisions made for them. The Second Amendment put forward for the Alberta Bill of Rights pertains to the right for responsible firearm ownership to acquire and keep and use firearms in accordance with the law. Lastly, we will be introducing an amendment to further protect the individual's right to property, as protection of property rights is a cornerstone of living in a free society. I would like to expand on this amendment first and foremost. We can all agree that no Albertan should be deprived of their property without legal authority and just compensation. Our Alberta government should be required to compensate all individuals and businesses if their hard-earned property comes under the ownership of the government. And the same should go for any incidents where a law enacted would deprive an individual or business of the reasonable uses of their property. The last term I was on the property review committee that toured the province and went to many places and listened to people. And we heard a lot about legislative takings or legislations that were passed and it made a person's property less value. Now they understood that that might have had to be the case, but they wanted to be compensated. And some of them had problems even accessing that. So I think to enshrine this should help us out there. Fully support this amendment to protect property rights for all Albertans, and I know many of my constituents will agree. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to note many of my constituents have spoken to me in regard to their rights to acquire, keep, and use firearms in accordance with the law. Many of my constituents make their living on the land as farmers and ranchers, hardworking Albertans who use firearms as a tool of their trade, a tool which has become a fundamental part of their culture. The Second Amendment put forward in Bill 24 reinforces the right of lawful firearm ownership and affirms the government's intent that provincial laws should not interfere with their right to own acquired firearms. The federal government has unfairly targeted my constituents who enjoy responsible firearm ownership. Law-abiding firearm owners across this province should have the liberty to use the tools of their trade to engage in their hobbies in accordance with the law without government stepping in unnecessarily. Responsible firearm owners should not be punished by having their legally acquired firearms taken away due to the whims of the government. Unfortunately, we have a federal government that does not fully respect the rights of responsible firearm owners across the country, including here in Alberta. Thankfully, we have a leader who will continue to put the needs and priorities of Albertans first and foremost. A leader who will ensure our provincial government will never tread on responsible firearm owners. Now, in my hometown of Vermilion, we have the Vermilion Gun Club. I'm not a gun owner myself, but they've invited me down to some of their target competitions that they have. And the pride of ownership, and there's some firearms that have been passed down from many generations, and under the new laws, they may have to give these up. And just to see the passion they have for these things, we should do all we can to protect them. I, along with my colleagues on this side of the House, believe that individual rights and freedoms are paramount for a stronger Alberta. We believe in preserving, protecting, and celebrating our individual rights and freedoms. It's what makes Alberta the bastion of freedom we are known for today. The amendments put forward in Bill 24 support stronger individual protection against government overreach, allowing Albertans to live free from unnecessary restrictions. restrictions. In an ever-evolving world, we as citizens and elected officials must remain vigilant to ensure our rights and freedoms are maintained and protected, as our individual rights and freedoms are firm foundation of the free and democratic society we all enjoy here in Alberta. Albertans expect their government to safeguard and protect the rights and freedoms promised in our Alberta Bill of Rights, and that's exactly what we're working towards with this legislation. I strongly support this bill for the good of Albertans across the province, Albertans who want to safeguard their right to legally own and acquire firearms, Albertans who wish to make their own informed medical decisions, and Albertans who wish to enjoy their hard-earned private property in accordance with the law. For these reasons, I will be in support of the amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will recognize the member from Calgary-Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to speak to the Assembly on Bill 24, the Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024. First, I'd like to extend my thanks to my colleague and Minister of Justice for their work and input on this proposed legislation, which reinforces the freedoms and protections of Albertans. This bill is essential for safeguarding Albertans' rights on fundamental issues that impact our daily lives. And the Alberta Bill of Rights is a vital document, a cornerstone of Alberta's democratic fabric and a powerful protector of our civil liberties, as it has been for decades and as we wish to for decades to come. The Alberta Bill of Rights has long enshrined principles that resonate deeply with every Albertan: the freedom to speak one's mind, the right to practice one's faith, and equality before the law. These rights define who we are, and they remind us of the value Alberta places on personal freedoms and responsibility. However, as our society evolves, so too must our laws. The Alberta Bill of Rights has served us well, but it is time to make some key adjustments to ensure these cherished rights are effectively safeguarded in a rapidly changing world to meet our current realities. There's been some comments before about, we already have certain, rights have already been protected in other places. It's been mentioned about Article 19, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which sets out in broad terms the human rights that each of us has. It was later protected by a raft of international and regional treaties. What wasn't mentioned, of course, is that many of the signatories of this very universal declaration violate this on a daily basis in very explicit and open terms. Nor we talk about what has transpired even with our Canadian Charter of Rights, where not only the federal government violates the principles of our Constitution on a regular basis, but where we have a situation where Supreme Court justices reinterpret in contrary to the very words that have been used by the people who sat around the table and drafted our Constitution, said was the intention of the provisions within the Constitution. And we don't have to look very far to see where governments have worked in conjunction with private sector media players to censure, contrary to their own constitutions and charters of rights and Bill of Rights, the freedom of speech of their citizens and their ability to speak unhindered by such censorship. So we as legislators in Alberta, we cannot impact on things like United Nations declarations or our federal constitution. But what we can do and make very clear is make changes to our provincial rights where we do have jurisdiction and ensure that the government of Alberta adheres to the principles that we so admire. And those principles are universal in terms of the arguments as to why we have. It starts with John Stuart Mill and continued on to Voltaire, who said, "I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Of course, that is about the freedom of speech and expression. And so we're going to add expression to the Bill of Rights because it hasn't been there, and as was discussed by some earlier, the way society has mentioned, it's not just in the written word or the spoken word that we express, but many other ways, and so these need to be protected. Why do we need these types of protections? We need it because we agree, or at least in a liberal, small L liberal society, we have agreed that governments need to be constrained. They need to be limited. As Thomas Jefferson said in his influential summary view of the rights of the British America, history has informed us that bodies of men, as well as individuals, are susceptible to the spirit of tyranny. History has shown over and again, that all the world's worst examples of tyranny and pain inflicted upon citizens have come from governments because they have coercive power. And so they must be limited. And so we must outline what are those rights of the individuals that cannot be constrained by governments. So, we'll address these gaps in the right protection in those areas that the Alberta Bill of Rights currently does not encompass the critical areas that Albertans today, and that includes health care, property rights, firearm ownership, and free expression. And this bill will empower Albertans to make decisions and ensure they have the power to make their decisions about their own lives and homes and health care, ensuring that their rights are respected and held by this government or any future Alberta government. Freedom in healthcare decisions, as Albertans should have the right to make their own healthcare choices without undue influence. And the member opposite made mention some minutes ago, about the fact that they understood, or he understood, that such protections already existed. That, that's one argument we can make. But if many people feel that it hasn't been protected in the past, do we not have a responsibility to make it clear to all that those types of protections are available explicitly so that there is no doubt? Bill 24 ensures that individuals have the autonomy over their personal health decisions, respecting their values, needs, and preferences. And this amendment will protect against mandated treatments or interventions, reinforcing the citizen's right to its personal health decisions. If the member opposite agrees that such rights already exist, then there should be no problem in supporting this addition into our current Bill of Rights. This amendment emphasizes the importance of private property as a fundamental right, which is central to Alberta's sense of security and ownership. And by strengthening this property rights, the amendment prevents unwarranted government intervention or interference in private property without legal authorization and just compensation. It will also protect the rights, promotes the stability at home and land ownership, fostering economic growth and community trust. As I mentioned before, this amendment ensures that Albertans have the freedom to express their views and participate in public discourse without fear of reprisal. And it encourages open debate and respectful exchange of ideas, which are fundamental to our democracy. By reinforcing free expression, the amendment prevents unjust limitations on individual voices in the public or private arenas. There's a lot going on in our society these days that seek to limit this type of conversation, and we need to reiterate and make clear to everyone that we do not agree with that trend or that deviation from the rights. This will be a stronger Alberta Bill of Rights. For any provincial law that is declared by a court to be inconsistent with the Alberta Bill of Rights, the inconsistent part of the bill could not be reinforced. And the Alberta Bill of Rights will provide the evaluation yardstick for all government actions, policies, and legislation going forward. Albertans will have greater confidence that their rights to property, personal health choices, and expression are respected and guaranteed. And this amendment makes clear that Alberta values and defends its citizens' autonomy and choices. And by addressing these essential rights, Alberta government shows its dedication to the people's will and well-being. Some people have expressed worry that these amendments will limit the government's ability to enforce policies. But the response is that this Bill 24 aims to balance individual freedoms with public safety and responsibility, preserving each citizen's personal liberties without impeding the government's duty to ensure public safety. And some may argue that this enhanced rights in property and firearms would lead to misunderstandings. And I would say the safeguards within Bill 24 ensure the rights are clear and specific, preventing any misuse of freedoms while enforcing individual rights for all, in accordance with the law. Some may argue that this bill limits the ability of private individuals or corporations to enforce restrictions regarding non-vaccinated access to offices and private property. However, while the bill reaffirms individual rights, it does not prevent private entities from implementing their own policies. It simply ensures that government actions do not infringe upon these individual liberties. And this balance allows for the protection of both personal freedoms and the rights of private individuals and corporations. So in conclusion, Bill 24 is a reaffirmation of Alberta's commitment to protecting its citizens' fundamental rights. I urge members to support Bill 24 as it reflects on Alberta's core values, respecting individual autonomy while fostering a free, safe, and responsible society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Here. Thank you. The member for Camrose has risen to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am so excited to address this piece of legislation, as I know it's very important to my constituents. I consider myself to be very fortunate to live in this free and prosperous province. I believe much of this freedom and prosperity originates in the governments of our province and country, understanding their primary purposes. First, to protect the citizens and their citizens' property, and second, to guarantee the rights of those citizens. The residents of my constituency expect their elected officials to share that view of government. They do not mind paying their dues if that means their families and communities can be protected. However, they do take issue when government policy infringes on their ability to lead law-abiding lives. Mr. Speaker, my constituents are also realists when it comes to government. They realize that even if their rights are not being infringed upon by the government of the day, future governments may still try to impede those rights. They also recognize that life in rural areas requires individuals to rely on themselves and their neighbours for safety and security at times of greatest need. This is one of the #1 issues I'm hearing about in my community, as there seems to not be enough law enforcement officers, and criminals are taking advantage of that fact. Since its inception, the Alberta Bill of Rights has been an incredibly important piece of legislation that reinforces the main purpose of government. The fact that fundamental rights and freedoms are recognized by statute in this province, I think all Albertans can appreciate. Much has changed in our society since the passing of the Bill of Rights. The federal government in particular seems intent on leaving law-abiding Canadians to fend for themselves, all while putting restrictions on our way of life, which is why I appreciate the Minister of Justice for all the work that he has done by putting forward the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024. Amending this key piece of legislation is vital in addressing the evolving needs of our society and ensuring our freedoms remain protected. One change this bill proposes is to affirm the rights of Albertans to keep and use firearms in accordance with the law. Many Camrose constituents are responsible firearms owners. Some keep firearms for sport, some for hunting, for the protection of their properties and families, or even all of the above. This is why I share their frustration with a federal government which has passed several laws restricting legal gun ownership. This is especially true since the Liberal NDP coalition soft on crime approach has left us with a decade-high gun crime in Canada, despite the restrictions. Mr. Speaker, hearing my constituents' complaints that they feel targeted while criminals who steal their property and make them feel unsafe go unimpeded has made this area a personal priority. That is why I intend to introduce a private member's motion recognizing the unique challenges related to crime rural communities face and urging the federal government to strengthen individual rights to protect themselves and their property. Reaffirming responsible ownership as a legitimate and respected aspect of life in Alberta in the Bill of Rights will also send a strong message to the federal government that our province opposes their overreaching restrictions on law-abiding people. This amendment would also prevent future provincial governments from attempting to restrict gun ownership and use if those attempts were inconsistent with the Alberta Bill of Rights. On top of strengthening the position of the province on law-abiding gun ownership, the proposed bill will also strengthen property rights, another cornerstone of a free and democratic society. Strong property rights are a necessity for economic stability and personal freedom across Alberta. Places where people's personal property is subject to confiscation by the government without a fair process or reasonable compensation are places where people have little reason to acquire and develop property. The constituency of Camrose is home to many growing communities and many farmers who pride themselves on the prosperity they have generated for not only themselves but their families. It's also home to countless local businesses kick-started by entrepreneurs with dreams they have turned into a reality. Amending property rights not only supports the rights of property owners in my constituency, but will also promote confidence that their investments and hard work will be safe from government appropriation. In circumstances where the government must use an individual's property to run a new power line or road through the field, for example, the proposed amendments to the Bill of Rights would require that the individual is fairly and properly compensated. As Alberta's story unfolds, the government come and go. Broader property rights will protect my constituents' property and their right to legally owned firearms. I know I have focused on only two elements of this bill because they speak most clearly to the priorities of my constituents, but the other elements of this bill also align with the two purposes of government at the beginning. Other changes would add protections for individuals who have capacity to be coerced, who have capacity to not be coerced into medical treatment without consent unless they are likely to cause substantial harm to themselves or others. The amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights being proposed will also make it a much stronger civil document. Currently, it only applies to laws in Alberta, such as statutes or regulations. However, many government programs and policies are not specifically authorized by a statute or a regulation. If the proposed changes are passed in this House, the Bill of Rights will become more encompassing, meaning any provincial government action will be covered by the Act. Mr. Speaker, when I first rose today, I talked a bit more philosophically about the purpose of the government, but the proposed amendments are far from just philosophical. The right to make one's own medical decisions, the right to legally and responsibly own firearms, and the right to own one's own property should all be strongly reinforced in my view. It will also send a strong message to Ottawa that we here in Alberta have not forgotten the fundamental purposes of our government. Our government is fully committed to protecting the values, freedoms, and way of life that make Alberta the best place to live, start a family, be safe, and prosper. We are keeping that commitment with the proposed amendments, which I hope all in this House will support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there others? The honourable member for Cypress Medicine Addison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since its inception, the Alberta Bill of Rights has recognized the fundamental rights and freedoms that are essential to a free and democratic society. It has served as a safeguard for our civil liberties and freedoms for decades and is paramount to democratic continuity. However, as our society grows and evolves, so too must our laws to ensure that these protections are evolving with our society. This is why our government is seeking to amend and strengthen our Alberta Bill of Rights. Amending the Bill of Rights is vital to addressing the evolving needs of our society and ensuring our freedoms are protected in the face of modern challenges. Our proposal to amend the Bill of Rights is our way of better reflecting the diverse values and experiences of all Albertans, ensuring that everyone's rights are upheld and that justice is not just an ideal, but a reality for all. To achieve this effectively, we are considering our specific amendments that will align with contemporary values and challenges. First, we will reinforce the right for every Albertan to make their own choices regarding medical treatment they receive. This includes ensuring that every individual in our province, with the mental capacity to do so, will have the right to decide whether or not they receive medical procedures. Individuals also have the rights to understand what, if any, of these medical procedures entail, to ensure informed decisions about their health and well-being. Informed consent, Mr. Speaker, is crucial for Albertans to make an educated and intentional decision when it comes to their health care. On top of strengthening health care rights, we are also strengthening property rights, another cornerstone of living in a free and democratic society. Strong property rights are necessary for economic stability and personal freedoms all across our province. Expanding property rights not only supports the rights of property owners, but it also promotes a sense of confidence and security of investment which Albertans make, which in turn encourages economic growth and entrepreneurship. It will ensure that no Albertan can be deprived of their personal property without due process of law and just compensation. This will strengthen Albertans' rights where the Expropriation Act may fall short. The government would be required to compensate individuals and businesses should they take ownership of an Albertan's property, or if any law deprives them of reasonable use of that property. We want to protect property rights, ensuring that they are respected rather than arbitrarily violated. Broadening these rights through these amendments will do just that, Mr. Speaker. For many Albertans, such as those involved in our agricultural industry or small business ownership, property rights are crucial to their livelihood and financial security. Our province is home to countless local businesses, kick-started by entrepreneurs who had a dream they could turn into reality. It is vital that Albertans engage in economic activities without excessive regulations or government interventions. Our government firmly stands against the overreach of federal regulations, focusing instead on advocating for the interests of Albertans. To do this, we must adopt our legal framework to our current societal values and challenges. Property is not constitutionally protected, Mr. Speaker. Our amendment to do so is going to ensure that we reaffirm the right to own and enjoy property that Albertans have worked so hard to earn, free from undue government interference. Our government is also committed to enhancing protections of freedom of expression, serving as a reminder of the importance of freedom of speech in a democratic society. This proposed amendment ensures that Albertans can freely express their opinions, their beliefs, and ideals openly and without fear of retribution. In an age where public discourse can be stifled by surrounding pressures, this amendment serves as a safeguard for individuals wishing to engage in meaningful discussion on various issues. Our government aims to create an environment where diverse perspectives can be shared, debated, and recognize the importance of open dialogue and how that fosters a healthier community. Freedom of expression also encompasses the right to peaceful assembly. In recent years, this right has become increasingly more important, evident in public protests and other gatherings that advocate for social change. It is vital that Albertans feel confident and comfortable in expressing their beliefs without the fear of government intervention by punitive means. Active participation in democratic processes is essential for our healthy communities, allowing Albertans to engage constructively with one another and with their government. Finally, there is an amendment to make clear that in Alberta, we respect the rights of individuals to legally acquire, keep, and safely use firearms. For many Albertans, firearms are critical to providing for their families and critical to their livelihoods and way of life. They are integral to their lifestyle, whether it be in activities such as farming, ranching, or recreational hunting. This amendment acknowledges and validates these practices. Our government is committing to stand up for lawful firearm ownership. Provincial laws should not infringe upon the rights. Absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate it. And again, member from Brooks, Medicine Hat country down there. You're also our military liaison, which you've been doing a phenomenal job on. If you could, you're getting to the firearms rights. If you could comment a little bit, I'm not sure if you've heard some of the similar things. Some of the veterans in my area, when it came to firearms rights, had this very large concern that they could go serve for our country. They could throw lead down range. They could go do all those things in peacekeeping missions. When they came back and became civilians, then all that service and everything they did was basically washed away when it came to the firearms rights file. Can you maybe comment a little bit on some of the things you've heard from our veterans out there in respect to how this is going to help stand up for them as well as other firearms owners in light of the service they've done and the things they've done for us?
I'd like to thank, Mr. Speaker, my colleague from Lac St. Anne Parkland, because a number of veterans have reached out to my office to express their desire to ensure that we are enshrining into provincial law the legal ownership of firearms and to be able to acquire them, because it is part of their culture, it's part of their training. They have often, in most cases, survived in some of the worst conditions imaginable, knowing that their friends to their left and their right, plus their firearm, were able to keep them alive during those points. So it's become a point of personal usage and personal identity in many cases. Our government is committed to standing up for lawful firearms ownership. Provincial laws should not infringe upon the rights of the right to own firearms in any case where Albertans are adhering to the law. Law-abiding firearms owners, like those members of the Medicine Hat Rifle and Revolver Club, have faced unfair targeting by the federal government for decades, which has highlighted the importance of this amendment. We aim to better protect the rights of Albertans, especially our farmers, ranchers, outfitters, and hunting enthusiasts. Firearms are a vital role in the livelihood of many of our rural communities. Ensuring access to firearms can support agricultural practices and contribute to local economies, especially those that are in the outfitter trade or participate in the hunting tourism sector. We seek to balance individual rights with community values and economic realities in Alberta, reflecting a commitment to local perspectives on gun ownership. Our government is dedicated to creating an environment where responsible gun ownership is recognized as a legitimate and respected aspect of life. Mr. Speaker, we hear what Albertans want, and what they want is to ensure that their rights are protected, that their property that they have acquired through hard work is protected and theirs. Our proposed amendments are essentials for individuals' freedom and autonomy. They are fundamental for a just and equitable society. By explicitly enshrining these updated rights, our amendments foster a sense of security and respect amongst Albertans, promoting civil engagement and reinforcing the importance of local voices in our governance process. We are not just proposing these amendments as mere legislative formalities. They represent a powerful affirmation of our commitment to the values and needs of Albertans, to the needs of our communities across this province. Such amendments are necessary to ensure that the voices of Albertans are being heard and fortified, especially in face of broader federal overreach. Our government is giving Albertans another tool in their belt to challenge a government's decision. We are not only seeking to protect the freedoms of today, but we're also laying the groundwork for a more and just future. Our government is committed to defending the rights of Albertans, especially those in rural and agricultural communities. This is a bold step forward, a society that honors its heritage and where it came from, while confidently embracing the challenges of what tomorrow may bring. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there others? The honourable member. I believe that the honourable member for Lac St. Anne Parkland has already spoken to the matter. No. No? Okay, my list is incorrect. The honourable member for Lac St. Anne Parkland.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for giving me a chance to speak to this very important bill. Bill 24, the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. Now, Mr. Speaker, Christmas only comes once a year, but this is awesome. Coincidentally, I was, speaking to my wife this morning. She was asking how things were going, and I said, a lot of time we get in there, we represent our constituents, we talk about all the good things that are going on, and sometimes we say that, but it falls short sometimes. It's kind of tough days. When I got to see that this bill was on the docket, Mr. Speaker, it absolutely made my day. This is an honor and a privilege to stand up and talk about a piece of legislation that's going to amend our Bill of Rights that hasn't been touched up since Premier Lougheed and his original group came together and put that on the table. We've heard a few conversations here of the relevance of it. We've heard what does it really matter to some of our constituents. Maybe it's different in a few different pockets around the province, but I can tell you full well in my capacity as the Parliamentary Secretary for Economic Corridors, and not only that, but in my constituency, this is very relevant. As strong advocate for personal rights and freedoms, for firearms ownership, responsible ownership, this hits on a number of cylinders. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to jump into this very wonderful points that I had put on the paper here for me today, so I didn't lose my spot. So back in the day, the Honourable Peter Lougheed and his Conservative government introduced the Bill of Rights, which I'd said, and this was to the right of individual liberty, security, personal enjoyment, property, the right to not be deprived of these except due to process of law, the right to equality before the law and the protection of the law, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly and association, freedom of press, and the right of parents to make informed decisions respecting the education of their children. So we brought forward some new amendments on this, Mr. Speaker, and it's aimed to strengthen the Bill of Rights, brought in by the Conservatives old, and this world is changing, and a few of the items that we went through here in the last number of years might make a little relevance. First item that was updated here was actually the preamble. And, we kind of went through that first part, and it covered off pretty much everything that a person would want, except the exceptions which seem to happen as life goes on. So what the preamble is being amended as, whereas the free and democratic society existing in Alberta is founded on the principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God and the rule of law on those principles, fostered by tradition that the honor and respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms and the dignity is worth of the human person and position of the family in society for free people and free institutions. Whereas human rights and the fundamental freedoms are of foundational importance to an Albertan society, including in times of emergency. So where that might make a lot of relevance is in what we went through in the last couple of years here. So major changes in the proposed amendments on medical choices. They reinforce the right of Albertans to make their own choices regarding the medical treatments they receive, including the right to decide whether or not to receive a vaccination or medical procedure. That's paramount from what we've gone through, Mr. Speaker, regardless of the conversations of choice, the medical requirements, law, the ability to work, provide for your families based on those choices. We needed to touch that up. Expanding the property rights, the government would be required to compensate individuals or businesses if government takes ownership of their property, or if a law deprives the individual or business of all reasonable uses of their property. So right now there's a lot of gray areas when it comes to property ownership, and the folks in the country get this often, like if there's an easement going through their locations or areas, or if there's something they do work on their properties, or you put a trail or something in. There's a lot of this that takes place, and some of the environmental decisions. sometimes when that happens, whether there's an easement or otherwise, not necessarily expropriation, but it impacts your access to your land. And a number of times, even though it was with good intent, some of our ministries may have inadvertently done that and trapped assets of landowners. So in that case, what it does is it makes sure that those property owners, their property rights are upheld, and they'll be duly compensated for that, for reasonable use or access to their property. It's kind of a big deal. It's like, you know, somebody in the city, you have your backyard, you built your patio, and then all of a sudden the city decides to do something different. You can't get access to your patio anymore, but you get to watch your neighbors use it. Legal firearms protection. Through the proposal of the Firearms Amendment, we reinforce our commitment to standing up for lawful firearms owners in Alberta and affirm the government's intent that provincial laws should not interfere with the right to legally own firearms. So one of the members opposite had spoke and said, yes, this is federal jurisdiction, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it is. It didn't used to be. You know, back in the 60s, there was this nice court case that took place that took it from firearms being national property to something else different. Now it's been managed by them for a number of years. When, you know, we were first elected, Mr. Speaker, when I was first elected, it wasn't all but a year getting into it that these wackadoo policies from the feds were coming out regarding firearms ownership. And it was all over the map, and I've spoken here at length on that, of how they were starting to determine whether a rifle or a handgun was good or bad or otherwise. And a lot of it seemed to be an emotion. It was never about caliber. It was never about the size of it or anything else or the functionality. It was literally somebody making up a decision on that. And that made a lot of people very nervous because, again, firearms owners are the most scrutinized people in all of Canada when it comes to criminal record checks. Literally, your name, mine, as a firearms owner, would be going through a database every single day and being scrubbed to see if I'd done anything untoward, unlawful, or otherwise. And with that, they're basically picking on the safest population in the entire country to have that privilege of owning a firearm. So coming back to that point, if we want to reinforce and make sure that folks understand in Canada and also in Alberta here that if you're an Albertan, yeah, we're going to stand up for you for your property rights. And we believe that within the jurisdictional law, you should have the absolute right to responsible firearm ownership. Medical autonomy. Every Albertan should have the right to make their own health care choices without government overreach. Everyone is different. Bill 24 ensures that individuals have the autonomy over personal health decisions, respecting their values, needs, and preferences. And we aim to sweep away or get away from that one-size-fits-all. Property rights are intrinsically linked to the culture within those within Alberta, and it's a fundamental right to secure all Albertans should possess. Our government wants to strengthen property rights to prevent government interference in private property without just cause. Again, I kind of spoken about that a little bit earlier, Speaker. Strong economy, it demands a stable understanding of property rights and a linkage to the longevity of people settling down, doing business, and growing Alberta's economy. The other one, too, is, you know, a man's house is his castle, as the old saying goes. Your property is the same thing. You want to know if you're investing in something, if you're buying that, if you're sticking your neck out there to purchase more land and pick it up, that you will actually have the ability to use it to function, to grow the economy, to grow your business, to raise your family, to do all those things that we oftentimes just take for granted. So unless it's really written down in words of law in this legislative assembly, I hope will work with us on this to get it passed. We want to enshrine that and make sure that there is no questions about that at all. I'd love an intervention.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for his comments surrounding this legislation. I was wondering if the member could, on that point he was just raising, elaborate on the notion, the natural law principle, that the law we create here needs to reflect the true law that exists already, that these rights are not created by us but precede us, that mankind, humankind, pre-exists the state, and the laws that we're entitled to and the responsibilities that come from it are not created by us, but whether it be property rights, as the member was mentioning, in relation to lawful gun ownership, or property rights more broadly, talking about just compensation for land, etc., that those rights exist before the government decides to recognize them. And this is simply an act of us recognizing those rights, and maybe talk a bit about the danger when a state thinks that it gets to create rights and they don't exist in some important way beyond just this body opining and passing laws.
I appreciate. Sorry? Okay, good. Perfect. Well, I appreciate the intervention from the minister, and he's spot on. You know, right at the very start of this, you know, we go back to the preamble, and it states as such. You know, and we make reference to God. So that's not by happenstance that we believe as free people, as society, that our country was founded on, and you know the countries we came from originally as well. That, and the Indigenous here as well, the First Nations folks that were here originally, they have this inalienable feeling, this internal knowledge that they are a free people. We are free people. So everything that we've assembled, everything as lawmakers that we come in here and have these debates on is simply reinforcing that truth that we know to be true right in our soul, right in our gut, right in our being. And in essence, what we're doing is just making sure that that's reinforced, that inalienable understanding is there. The items where the Honourable Minister touched on is when the state, and that's just people, that's just people winning popularity contests typically is how that happens. When those folks win those contests and they start thinking that they know better or can overreach those areas, that's when things go sideways in a hurry. And that's when people's rights get trampled on, and that's when you have to fight, literally fight, to get those freedoms back. And as society, we've seen that through armed conflicts or otherwise where those scales, those injustices had to be righted. And I believe a number of our veterans have done that. You know, as my comments back to the member from Medicine Hat, in that area, Brooks Medicine Hat, as we talked about with our veterans standing up for those inalienable rights. In fact, we've gone to other countries to make sure that their rights and freedoms are there. So some of the overreach we've experienced over the years, some of the items that we've seen here in our own country, this is very salient and very to the point. And even if I'm not to reference the pages in the audience, but their pages here, they're our next generation. We're literally doing these things to make sure that you have these rights, that you can continue to go forward with them without that being compromised. And when I'm at home looking at my kids in the eye, and again, when I'm referencing my wife this morning, this is a very critical piece of information, a very critical piece of legislation that we're putting forward here to make sure that your rights and freedoms are respected within this province and within this country. The freedom of speech and expression, that was another item we touched on, Mr. Speaker. So free speech is there. I mean, it was, you know, the amendment ensures that Albertans have the freedom to express their views and participate in public discourse without fear or reprisal. So in other words, I should be able to say something that's completely wrong if it's still my opinion it's wrong, and somebody else should be able to correct me and have their opinions heard just as loudly. And heaven forbid if my thing that I'm saying is wrong and inaccurate becomes the law, and anyone else who wants to speak against it all of a sudden is the criminal. I mean, when we talk about freedom of speech in this country, that is 100% under attack by a number of different items that we're sitting here from federal law. If we say the truth, if we talk about what our good energy sector does and all the good things they're working on, we just had laws passed federally that'll take that down. We've seen our internet usage basically taken down. We've seen a number of things where people are expressing themselves that used to be open public discourse was encouraged. You've got this cancel thing where people are going out there. This, maybe it's tokenism or otherwise, but we're reaffirming what we know to be true and what should be right. Support for diverse opinions. Encourage open debate with respectful exchange of ideas, which are fundamental to democracy. You know, I know for full well I am not the smartest person in this room. I know that every time I walk in here with that attitude, some of the members are laughing, they agree with me, and this is good. I agree, this is right. And if that member took the same attitude, I'm sure we could have more civil discourse. So this is the part where I know to be true, to come into this room and know that, because what it makes me do, Mr. Speaker, is to listen more. And I know when I listen to other people's ideas, even though I may not agree with them, that I'm going to get something out of that. It's that humility of understanding that maybe you aren't the smartest person in the room, and if you treat it as such, you might have some pretty good ideas coming forward. Protect against censorship by reinforcing free expression. The amendment prevails to unjust limitations on individuals' voices in public arenas. So in short, it's a stronger Bill of Rights for any provincial law that's declared to the court to be inconsistent with the Alberta Bill of Rights. The inconsistent part of the Bill of Rights could not be enforced. So this is in a sense setting precedents that this Bill of Rights takes precedent over everything else that we're putting in place, that everything underneath that has to be subject to it and make sure that it's contemplated that it isn't actually infringing on our Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights will provide the evaluation yardstick for all government actions, policies, and legislations. The amended Bill of Rights does not contradict anything in the Charter. The proposed amended Bill of Rights will serve as an additional tool for Albertans to challenge a government decision. So we're at a pivotal point in history here, Mr. Speaker. We have a really good opportunity to reinforce what we've already had and what the founding Conservative group did back when in Lougheed's age, Premier Lougheed's age. We have a chance to look at everything that's taken us up to this point. We have an opportunity, I believe, in our country where we've never seen such polarized views or opinions being put into law that are contradicting a lot of things and a lot of principles and truths that we know to be right. We have a chance here in this Legislative Assembly for Albertans, and I'm hoping for other provinces that will follow in our lead as many times it happens when we take that first leap of faith to go out there and make sure that we identify what we know to be true and reinforce those Bill of Rights. There's a couple other items in here, but without actually... Sure, I'll take another one.
Mr. Speaker, increasingly it's important in debate to understand the intent of the legislation, especially when it comes to interpretation of the courts, and that is the purpose of second reading, is to scrutinize the intent of legislation, the purpose and goals. So when this member, as a legislator, is looking at the legislation in front of us, obviously respecting the responsibility of the different levels of government, what is the member's understanding of why we're bringing forward legislation within provincial jurisdiction when it comes to protecting, say, property rights or protecting within our own purview of responsibility, autonomy of an individual to make healthcare decisions for themselves? Is it the member's intent to drift into a federal lane? Or is it the member's intent with this legislation and how he understands it to stay squarely within provincial jurisdiction when it comes to property, health, etc., in legislating in Bill 24?
2 minutes and 40 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question on that. And to the minister, no, actually, we're going to stay well within our lane, well within our wheelhouse. So with only having 2 minutes left, it's going to be the benefit of everyone in the Assembly if I just get right to the point. The way our country is made, the way our Constitution sits, the provinces and the country essentially are on level playing field. There's a dissemination of the chores of the duties of what's been handed down from the country and what the country takes care of as Canada and what the provinces take care of. This legislation that we're putting in place stays squarely within our lane, stays squarely within our responsibilities. So if you look at healthcare, education, if you look at the energy side of the equation, that is all well within our wheelhouse. This only reinforces what we know to be true, the property rights within our wheelhouse. And in what we've had as history taking place is when the provinces don't fill those lanes, you tend to get a little bit more scope creep. And I've talked about in here before about the good neighbor policy of folks poking their fingers over your fence. Sometimes you got to make sure they know which side of the fence they should stay on. It makes good neighbors. I think this goes to show that with what we have, knowing full well what our responsibilities and our accountabilities are within the province, that we're going to fill those spaces, make sure Albertans' Bill of Rights, that these are hold to be true within our areas of jurisdiction, and that they'll be here for generations to come. And, moreover, respect the intent of how our country was meant to be governed in the first place and the laws and privileges that have been afforded to us. With that, I'll end my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there others? I earlier saw the Minister of Energy and Minerals rising, and he will be likely followed by the Honourable Member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An absolute honour to stand today and talk about a bill that is so important. And people may ask why it's important, Mr. Speaker. And often people look at the opportunity for individual rights and how important individual rights are so that people aren't oppressed by the state. Well, I'm going to take a different view of it today. We've heard a little bit about the belief on individual choice, and we've heard a little bit about property rights and also respect for lawful actions, Mr. Speaker. But I really believe that we haven't talked enough about how important property rights are. And I say that because the system of law that we use is called the Torrens system of law. It's from South Australia. And what they did was when they first settled Australia, they decided they would come up with a different system of law of land registration so that people would know the plot of land they own, Mr. Speaker. And it sounds like it's a simple process and it would make sense to a lot of people, but land registration and the ability to register land and have a title that is guaranteed by the registrar is an unusual concept in most of the world. But Mr. Speaker, I would argue that that is one of the greatest parts of our system of law is the law of property rights. Because people can actually have and know that within a central registry here in Alberta is the specific legal description and municipal description of their land that they own. And they have certain rights within that land, Mr. Speaker. You've heard before, I know, as many people coin the phrase, my home is my castle. Well, Mr. Speaker, your property should be your castle because we've seen the true difference between places with the law of property with a registration system, the law of property of Torrens system, like Canada, the United States, Australia, that have amazing opportunities to build wealth. And Mr. Speaker, we see other countries that don't have the ability to pledge their land or build things upon it. And even here in Canada, we have that same situation with some of our Indigenous friends and some of the Métis communities. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that some of the things that have been holding those individuals up, those communities up. I believe that our opportunity with land and the opportunity that we see in this particular bill, Bill 24 today, is something that's extremely important, and many people don't understand how important it is. But I say it's really important, Mr. Speaker, because it allows people to come up out of poverty and truly find opportunity. I saw it in Fort McMurray, for instance, when 1,700 people lived there in 1968. And today, Mr. Speaker, there's 70,000 people there. We did get up to 110,000, but we were able to do that so quickly because people could actually borrow on the land that they owned. They could sell that land, sell parts of it. But, Mr. Speaker, the law of property and property rights has been diminished somewhat by, you're not going to believe it, by the state, Mr. Speaker, by governments. They have actually limited people's individual property rights, corporations' individual property rights, to be able to do what they need to do on that land, to have opportunity, to seize it, to make their lives better and the lives of their family better. Mr. Speaker, this bill does exactly that. It strengthens property rights for individuals so they don't have to worry about the oppression of the state coming and seizing that property. And you can think, well, that doesn't happen here in Alberta, but it does, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I saw it happen in Fort McMurray, believe it or not, just over a decade ago. The municipal council there at the time decided in their wisdom that they would start a hockey arena. And they would build a really nice hockey arena for our junior team. We have a great team, by the way, the Oil Barons. And they decided that they would negotiate on the land and buy out all the buildings in a certain area of downtown Fort McMurray. And then after they bought out all the buildings, they would then strike the deal with the hockey team. Very not a great concept. But what happened, Mr. Speaker, is they bought out the downtown. They, in fact, leveled the buildings, and now we have a park there. And you know what? I don't know if you've seen what most of the parks are inhabited by in Alberta right now and across Canada, but let's just say it's not little kids playing basketball. There's a lot of homeless people there and some homeless issues there, Mr. Speaker. And what they've done is taken out about 40 or 50,000 square feet of office space that had been there for 50 years. And those businesses argued about it. In fact, there was 2 law firms in those businesses that argued about it, but the state still oppressed them. They took that land away from them. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying that this would be a perfect solution to that, but it certainly moves us more in the direction towards individual and corporate property rights and the ability to seize opportunity when they arise. And that's why I like this bill so much, Mr. Speaker. Now, there's no question that recently we've heard loud and clear from Albertans that they want the ability to make those personal health decisions that are important to them. So that's a reflection of bodily autonomy and the ability to make decisions for themselves. But I would argue, Mr. Speaker, that the biggest, longest-term positive result of this particular bill will be property rights. Will be the ability to expand the property protections to Albertans so that when they have ownership, when they borrow money against that property, they know that they can use that property for a long-term investment and a return for their family. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that we'll see a tremendous opportunity there, making the state actually pay for their actions. And Mr. Speaker, I say that because I've seen across this province over the last number of years developers not developing property. And that's probably, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, from my experience as a developer in my past life, as a result of so many different pieces of legislation and so many barriers put in place for people that want to exercise that right for opportunity. And Mr. Speaker, I think this is another situation where we're going to see less government interference in the opportunity for individuals to pursue their dreams. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that we will see a real change in investments in Alberta as a result of that, and Alberta will actually lead the country in investments, Mr. Speaker. Well, guess what? We already do. And Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you another story about why it's so important that we have this. And I'm talking particularly in regards to the energy file. Our geological organizations here in Alberta, the organization, have both a warehouse in Edmonton and a warehouse in Calgary. And those warehouses include samples of water and soil and core samples from the energy sector over the last 70 years, Mr. Speaker. And that couldn't have been done, in my opinion, without the great legal framework that we have under the Torrens system of law. You see, Mr. Speaker, the reason why we are the best geological formation on the planet, or one of, I think, two right now, as a choice for carbon capture and sequestration, is because the Torrens system of land is alive and well here. Most of the land, most of the geological formations here in Alberta belong to the Crown. So as a result of that, we don't have the long contracts of 300 or 400 pages that they have in the United States when they're trying to do CCUS operations. We have, Mr. Speaker, here in Alberta the opportunity for the Crown to designate particular zones for that use exclusively because the Crown has that. That would not be available in most jurisdictions around the world, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I would suggest very few. And in the United States, it's so cumbersome that, as I mentioned, they have lawyers upon lawyers that deal up and put together contracts that, Mr. Speaker, frankly, as most people know, absorb a lot of the opportunities for profits for those landowners. So I just say to you, Mr. Speaker, these expanded property protection rights, the opportunity to be a leader in Canada and North America on property rights, I think is nothing short of an opportunity to provide compliments to the Premier, and I would do so, Mr. Speaker. I've been watching this file come forward, and I can't tell you how much I wish that we could expand these property rights to all individuals in Alberta, not just the people that live on a torn system of land and land registration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there others? The Honourable Member for Fort Saskatchewan, Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to rise and speak to Bill 24, the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024. I would like to thank the Minister of Justice for bringing this bill up and the important issue to the Assembly. I'm proud to represent many legal firearm owners in my riding. These law-abiding, responsible citizens are individuals who already follow the strict laws that are placed here in Canada. Many Albertans across our province are in the same group. They are responsible firearms owners. These responsible firearms owners take the required safety courses in order to become licensed, and they must get their firearm registered. They must also go through a personal history section that asks for the criminal history, such as misuse of firearms, mental health, and suicide. Through these processes, authorities are well aware of who is owning firearms. Illegal firearms owners skip the process. Adding more laws to legal firearm owners is not solving any issues with illegally owned guns, which cause a lot of the related gun violence. We can see this reality unfolding across Canada today. The current federal government has added many restrictions on firearm ownership, including a national freeze on handguns, expanding definition of prohibited firearms, and increasing licensing requirements. However, despite these changes, firearm-related violent crimes in Canada has gotten worse, not better. The amendments proposed to the Alberta Bill of Rights are about our province. Over the years, governments and MLAs come and go and attitudes change. Adding the right to acquire, keep, and use firearms in the Bill of Rights would make future provincial governments reconsider before attempting to implement restrictions on these rights. Thankfully, the provincial government I am proud to be part of understands this issue very well. In 2021, our government asserted its provincial authority by appointing a chief firearms officer to stand up for the rights of law-abiding firearm owners in Canada. We also passed the Municipal Government Firearms Amendment Act in 2021, which prevents municipal councils from restricting legal firearm use without ministerial approval. We understand the need to continue through processes for gun licensing, which require training to become competent with their safe usage, storage, and transfer. However, the federal government's recent moves do not improve public safety and only unfairly target law-abiding gun owners. And I'll tell you a little story. My father, when I was very, very young, put me in his rubber boots, and we would go duck hunting or prairie chicken hunting. And anyone who has ever done that knows that it is very exciting. And as a little girl, I got to go every time. And once I see he'd get his gun ready, I was there ready to go. The other thing that also my dad did was keep the coyotes away from the chicken coop. Because as we know, those coyotes are really bad in rural Alberta. And if you don't contain them, those chickens are gone. And that was our food for the, happened to you? Okay, there you go. That was the food for the winter. So I'm happy that the rights of those law-abiding citizens will be further reinforced with Made in Alberta legislation if these changes are passed. We all know Alberta is an amazing place to live, and part of that is the unique identity we have. For instance, many of us are farmers or have parents who are farmers or even spent our childhood hanging out on our grandparents' farm. Many of you who grew up on farms or had relatives on a farm know that having a gun is a valuable tool. It's a necessary tool. Owning a firearm is not a matter of safety for you and your family, but also for your livestock and your farm in general. Predators such as coyotes, cougars, wolves, and other targeted livestock and poultry, and also target livestock and poultry and farms, which can cause significant loss of income for farmers. With firearms, farmers are able to use this tool in order to protect themselves, their families, and their livelihoods. Something that I and many Albertans who grew up around firearms understand is that firearms are powerful and valuable tools. Growing up around these weapons teaches you that there is a right place and time for them. In fact, the respect lends itself to responsible ownership. During the training required to be a licensed owner doesn't just mean learning proper procedures for use, storage, and transfer of firearms. It also means learning the consequences of not following those procedures. And one thing my father taught me was the consequences. Trust me, I felt it. There's consequences that have to be taken seriously. Responsible gun owners encourage others to be responsible gun owners. But we have legislators in Ottawa determining gun legislation in areas they know nothing of. This is why amendments being debated today are so important. I know many gun owners in my constituency who have expressed their concerns over unnecessary restrictions by the federal government. Those attempts to communicate have fallen on deaf ears. My hope is that a strong statement by a provincial government united behind these changes will be listened to. And having an Alberta Chief Firearms Officer ensures that our unique voices are being heard at the federal level. I know that this provincial government will continue to advocate for responsible firearm ownership. I would like to thank again the Minister of Justice for bringing this forward in this legislation that will help protect the rights and freedoms of law-abiding gun owners in our ever-changing world. I'm honoured to speak on behalf of my constituents of Fort Saskatchewan and Vegreville and all Albertans who feel the same way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, are there others wishing to speak to the bill? I see the Honourable Member of Athabasca Barrhead Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to Bill 24. Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024. I stand here in support of the amendments that are being proposed, and I believe that it's more than just virtue signaling. The member from Calgary, Boular-McCall, was essentially in his speech alluding to that the government is just in a process of doing some virtue signaling, and I will attempt to address some of the areas where I think it's much more than virtue signaling, but it's needed changes within our Bill of Rights to ensure that Albertans, all Albertans, are protected from anything that would go against their individual rights, whether that's property rights, whether that's their freedom of speech, freedom of religion, whatever it might be, it's important that we review these things on a regular basis. I believe the current Bill of Rights was enacted in 1972, prior to the Charter being the Canadian Charter being enacted in the early 80s, 1982, 1983, something like that, I believe. And so we are revisiting the Alberta Bill of Rights at this time, and I would suggest it's well overdue. And I think I would agree with the Minister of Energy and Minerals in how important the changes to expanding the property rights within the province, how important that is to everyday Albertans. Everyday Albertans are continuing to grow their own personal equity and their ability to realize their opportunity in a free and democratic society. And we need to protect that ability and what they have been able to gain through those actions to ensure that the public good, ensure that the government is not able to impede them or essentially penalize them by taking property without proper compensation. So this is a good day in Alberta that we are able to stand here, and something that we've been discussing for probably a better part of 2 decades, to ensure that the property rights are expanded to compensate individuals or businesses if government takes ownership of their property, or if a law deprives the individual or business of any reasonable use of the property. They now have due process that will be made available to them, that they are protected under due process, and if they feel like they've been harmed in any way, that they're able to then go to the courts and ask for a ruling by the courts to ensure that they are protected. One of the things that is changing also in the Bill of Rights is just the strengthening of the preamble. Adding some words can have a huge impact on the intent of a bill, and also help those that come after us to ensure that they understand the intent of this legislature when enacting the bill. And so there's just a couple minor changes to the preamble. The government is proposing that acknowledge the supremacy of God and the rule of law. So we're adding 3 words there. The rule of law is recognized as an important part of the individual's rights. And it goes on to add and worth, human rights and fundamental freedoms, the dignity and worth of the human person, and the position of the family in a society of free people and free institutions. So what's being added is the wording, the position of the family in a society of free people and free institutions. I would suggest to you that our civil society is largely founded on the foundation of family. Earlier on today, we heard from the education minister and the importance of parents being involved in the education of their children, and how important that family aspect is to a society of free-thinking people. That society is able to recognize that family is an important part of the very foundation of civil society. And it's being added into the preamble here, and it might seem like virtue signaling to the members opposite, but I think what it's sending is a message that this government, the UCP government on this side of the House, recognizes the importance of family within our society, and how we work towards developing strong families and work towards helping those families in all that they do to grow as a family, to continue to thrive as a family, to be able to realize their opportunities within this society as a family. And so those words are incredibly important, I believe, and to be added in the preamble of the Bill of Rights, and it helps the next generation and generations after that to understand that at this point in time, people in Alberta understood that family was at the center of the foundation of individual rights and free and prosperous society. So I think there are other changes that would help to identify and clarify with regards to the gun ownership, firearm ownership, and for people legally obtaining and use of firearms. Mr. Speaker, it's no secret I come from farming background. I currently farm, and we utilize that tool on occasion to ensure that whether it's livestock or whether it's family, that they're protected from danger and protected from any threat that might come from whether it's wildlife or others. So, you know, like law-abiding citizens that have firearms respect law. And so we need to understand that they are utilizing firearms in a manner that continues to keep society civil, but that they need firearms to ensure that their families are safe and to make sure that their livestock are well taken care of and safe as well. So these additions and the clarification on the right to acquire and to keep and use firearms are an important part for especially my constituents who live out in the rural areas of the province where they may encounter difficulties with wildlife and with other threats to their well-being. I think that pretty much covers what I need to cover with regards to Bill 24, second reading. The intent of the bill, I believe, is very good. I believe the areas that it addresses helps to clarify some aspects that maybe were in question, but I also believe that the increased protection on property rights is probably a big part of how we are going to continue to succeed in our society and grow families that will be able to exist here for many generations to come. So with that, I would encourage all members of the legislature to support Bill 24 and the amendments that are being brought forward, and I will be voting in favor of second reading Bill 24.
Are there others? Seeing none, I am prepared to call on the Minister to close debate. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It certainly is, as always, a pleasure and an honour to have the opportunity to rise here to speak to this important bill and this important matter and to provide some closing thoughts. For this afternoon's robust debate, I want to take this opportunity to thank all members of this House for engaging in this robust debate. Mr. Speaker, I've had the honour and the privilege of taking this role for a little over a year now, and I've gained an appreciation for the foundational role that rights and freedoms play in our democratic society, and even more so with some of the challenges that our province has faced in the past few years. As part of this democratic process, we've heard from Albertans that they would like more government accountability when it comes to protecting their rights and freedoms. Mr. Speaker, we've heard from countless Albertans. We've listened and we've taken action here before you. Our government is responding with updated amendments to Alberta's Bill of Rights. The Alberta Bill of Rights was enacted in 1972, specifically to protect Albertans from the actions of their provincial government. A suite of rights so comprehensive, Mr. Speaker, that Alberta's Bill of Rights predated the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms by a decade. I've heard a little bit about virtue signaling from members of the opposition. I want to point out to all members in this Assembly that in 2023 in the Ingram decision, Justice Romaine described the rights in the Alberta Bill of Rights as real and absolute, Mr. Speaker. This is not virtue signaling. This is the court's interpretation of what these Bill of Rights truly confer upon all individuals in this great province. This makes it the most appropriate law to update in response to Albertans' concerns about actions infringing on their rights. The Public Health Emergencies Governance Review Panel agreed when they made a number of recommendations to amend the Bill of Rights. Several of these proposed amendments in Bill 24, the bill before this Assembly today, relate to recommendations in that panel's final report. If the amendment passes, Albertans will have a truly modernized Alberta Bill of Rights that adds to and reaffirms the rights available to them in the areas of medical consent, property rights, firearms rights, and freedom of expression. Further amendments would make the Alberta Bill of Rights a more robust civil rights document, Mr. Speaker. That would allow for better alignment with our Provincial Act and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And it'll provide more effective tools for making sure Albertans' rights are protected against all government action. While there's been rightly a focus in this Assembly on the new rights that we're adding into these amendments, I would like to take a moment to emphasize the importance of making sure that the Alberta Bill of Rights has an enforcement mechanism as well. After all, there is little value in granting Albertans any rights if they're easy for government to breach. Our proposed amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights demonstrate our commitment to upholding the rights and freedoms and all of those that Albertans hold dear. And finally, Mr. Speaker, if further proposed amendments reinforce Albertans' shared values in making updates to the preambles of the Act that refer to freedom, family, and the rule of law is of utmost importance. Mr. Speaker, as the sponsor of this bill, I truly endorse the proposed amendments to Bill 24, and I encourage every member in this House to support it. Thank you very much.
Honourable members, the Minister of Justice has moved second reading of Bill 24, Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 24, Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024 is now read a second time.
The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had an afternoon of high-minded and decorous debate. I am certain that Albertans at home watching feel the same way. And with that, I would move that we adjourn the Assembly until 1:30 tomorrow, Wednesday, October 30th.
Honourable members, having heard the motion as proposed by the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered, and the House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 1:30 p.m.
you.